Chapter 201, Speculation. Nathan's mind raced as he launched 3 kunai in rapid succession. Barely a heartbeat later, soft metallic clicks rang out. His skilled hands had intercepted the middle-aged Iwa ninja's thrown blades, halting them in mid-air. Without missing a beat, Nathan wove a series of hand seals at blinding speed. Fire release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique, he roared, parting his lips to unleash 100 searing fireballs in a single, powerful exhalation. At his command, the fireballs split into 2 waves. 2/3 hurtled toward the middle-aged shinobi, while the remaining third locked onto Aikawasuke, who lay gravely wounded on the ground. Nathan had noted how fiercely his opponent protected Suke, evidence of the young man's importance to the Iwa clan. Now he would exploit that bond to its fullest. "Curse you," the middle-aged ninja snarled, his face contorted with rage. But fury alone would not save his comrade. Steeling himself, he braced against the incoming inferno, determined to shield Aikawasuke at all costs. After all, Suke was their clan's rising star, and Nathan had no intention of letting that reputation go unchallenged. Indeed, the middle-aged Iwa shinobi and Aikawasuke were kin, so Suke would be the first to come to his relative's aid. Water escape, water formation wall. Before Nathan's fireball could reach him, the Iwa ninja snapped off a series of hand seals and unleashed a B-rank ninjutsu, summoning a cascading wall of water to intercept the attack. The fireball struck the barrier with a sharp hiss, sending up a billow of steam that instantly clouded Nathan's vision. Frowning, Nathan formed another seal. Wind release, great breakthrough. A howling gale swept across the clearing, dispersing the steam, smoke, and dust in a single burst. When the air cleared, Nathan peered into the now empty space. The spot where the Iwa shinobi and Aikawasuke had stood was gone, replaced by a roughly 70-80 centimeter hole gouged into the earth. They'd escaped, no doubt using an earth release technique. "So you used water release to counter my fire release. Was that your plan all along?" Nathan's temper flared at being outmaneuvered. He snapped his Sharingan open and swept the battlefield with a glare. In the distance, the middle-aged shinobi from Iwagakure, who had just burst from the earth, locked eyes with him, a mocking grin curling across his face. Cradled in Nathan's other arm lay the unconscious form of Aikawasuke. As if sensing Nathan's scrutiny, the Iwa veteran gave a taunting flourish, clearly daring Nathan to advance. But Nathan refused to take the bait. He clenched his jaw and weighed the risks. Several Iwagakure jonin were already nearby, fully capable of abandoning their current opponents and surrounding him in an instant. Charging forward would play right into their hands. Not about to walk into an ambush, he took a steadying breath and lowered his gaze. Shifting his attention to the wider skirmish, Nathan scanned for the rest of his team. His eyes settled on his youngest subordinate, fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. Nathan dropped into the fray just as 2 Iwagakure chunin had his target pinned to the ground, blood, whether his own or someone else's, slick on their uniforms. Without hesitation, Nathan activated his Shunshin no Jutsu, appearing behind them in the blink of an eye. Before they could even turn, he unleashed back-to-back genjutsu seals, locking their minds in a hypnotic trance. A single swing of his short blade was all it took. Both shinobi crumpled to the earth, lifeless. "Team leader," his subordinate called breathlessly as the 2 enemy bodies thudded down. Nathan gave a curt nod. "Move," he ordered, flexing off the ground and sprinting toward the next cluster of hostiles. If the Iwagakure had spared him free rein to protect Aikawasuke, he'd gladly repay the favor, and then some. Over the next 2 minutes, Nathan weaved through the battlefield like a viper. 7 more chunin fell beneath his relentless strikes. Each kill was swift, pursuit. See no wasted motion, no mercy. At last, 2 Iwagakure jonin converged on him, parting the fray to intercept the lethal intruder. Nathan paused, blade at the ready, only to find they never intended to press an all-out assault. Instead, they formed an ironclad defense, focusing entirely on neutralizing his offense. A faint smile curved his lips. So they wanted to play defense. All right, let's see how well they hold up against Nathan's own art of war. Whenever Nathan tried to break off the fight, they pressed the attack. The moment he struck back, they slipped away. It was infuriating, but their tactics revealed their true goal, to pin him down so the rest of the Iwagakure ninjas could operate freely. They weren't out to kill him, at least not yet. So Nathan decided to play along. Why finish off these two? He certainly could, unleashing everything he had. But then what? Two more Iwagakure Jonin down would only slow them for a moment. Their squad was packed with elite Chunin and Jonin. Could he really wipe them all out? He'd already proven his strength. Nearly 10 Chunin slain, 2 special Jonin and 2 full Jonin defeated, and another Jonin badly injured. That was more than enough. Any further bloodshed would be nothing but ostentation, and a dangerous one at that. After all, the tallest tree in the forest catches the fiercest wind. Before Nathan reached his full potential, he was careful not to flaunt his strength. Even now, his abilities likely outclassed 90% of Jonin, yet he held back just enough to keep his power within believable limits. Any more, and suspicion would quickly follow. Given the circumstances, he might as well entertain the Iwagakure Shinobi's plan, go fishing for opportunities, while quietly sharpening his swordsmanship on the side. He certainly wasn't going to lose any sleep over the lives of his fellow Konoha ninja. After all, he was more of their babysitter than their guardian angel, and there was no rule demanding that he protect them at every turn. In fact, Nathan sensed something wasn't right. A battle of this length should have tipped off Nara Surabaya to the true situation, prompting him to concentrate Konoha's forces for a decisive counterstrike. Instead, the opposition kept reinforcing in dribs and drabs, one squad after another, like pouring fuel onto a fire without ever unleashing enough strength to crush the Iwa shinobi. Such a strategy could only prolong the fight and rack up losses for Konoha. If this went on, it would be Konoha that paid the price. Nathan couldn't believe that Nara Surabaya had simply overlooked all this. There had to be a reason they'd been left behind. Either they were the only 2 shinobi available, or the fortress was under assault on multiple fronts and no reinforcements could be spared. Or, more troublingly, Nara Surabaya had a larger tactic in mind, using them as bait to pin down the Iwagakure ninjas. To Nathan, the bait theory made the most sense. If sheer numbers were the only issue, Surabaya would have withdrawn his men and shortened the defensive perimeter to limit casualties. He'd only risk lives for a greater purpose. How far are they willing to push this? Nathan wondered. With that question gnawing at him, he settled in to hear the 2 Iwagakure Jonin explain the situation. Chapter 202, Encirclement and End. 40 minutes had already passed since the battle began, and Nathan's deliberate delay had eaten up nearly 10 of them. At last, the tide of the fight began to shift. A sudden commotion rose at the edge of the field, the flank where the rock ninja had been holding a distant position from their base. Word evidently arrived among them, for some of the rock ninja hesitated, exchanged urgent signals, and then, after a brief struggle, began organizing a hasty retreat. Nathan narrowed his eyes as he watched. Turning to the 2 rock ninjas still opposing him, he called out with thinly veiled amusement, "Looks like your comrades are pulling back. Why don't you 2 follow suit?" The pair froze, startled. They spun around toward their lines and finally saw their fellows hastily withdrawing, an order they had somehow missed until now. It was hardly surprising. Though Nathan had kept them occupied, he had never held back. To refine his technique, he'd been wielding his swordsmanship at full force the entire time, forcing them to match his every feint and strike. But now, with their reinforcements gone, the 2 rock ninja realized they faced a fresh opponent in prime condition and no hope of support. Silence rippled through the battlefield as Nathan sheathed his blade with a single, precise motion. Around them, the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. The encirclement was complete, and for the remaining rock ninja, there was only one choice: surrender or fall here and now. Nathan pressed his advantage so relentlessly that the 2 Iwagakure Jonin had no choice but to give their all, or risk dying by his hand. It explained why they'd failed to notice the subtle maneuvers of their fellow village shinobi. As they exchanged puzzled glances, a series of sharp whistles, each varying in pitch and duration, cut through the air across the field. A retreat signal, one of them realized. Their faces hardened. Exchanging a wordless nod, they shifted tactics and lunged back at Nathan with renewed ferocity. In that instant, Nathan understood the purpose behind the whistles. His opponents weren't seeking a kill, they were buying themselves the space they needed to break off the fight. After all, As long as he kept them on the defensive, a clean escape would be impossible. So this was Narashishui's plan in motion. Nathan allowed himself a brief, inward grin. It seemed to be working, though whether it unfolded exactly as he'd anticipated remained to be seen. He tightened his grip on the short sword at his side and met their counterattack head-on, parrying each strike with ease. Moreover, every time the Iwagakure Jonin tried to pull back, they immediately counterattacked, making any true withdrawal impossible. This tactic rattled them with frustration, but Nathan remained as calm as still water. He hung back, neither pressing too hard nor backing down, content simply to play for time. In effect, he was using their own strategy against them, turning their relentless harassment into a lesson in patience. Almost at once, the two Iwagakure Jonin grew visibly uncomfortable under his steady restraint. A minute ticked by in mounting tension. As Nathan continued to deflect their increasingly hasty strikes, a sudden voice rang out in his mind. It was Yamanaka Tingfeng, channeling the clan's covert telepathic technique to update every Konoha Jonin within range. Along with the latest intelligence, Tingfeng relayed Narashishui's fresh orders. Nathan listened intently, then allowed a small, knowing smile to curve his lips. Just as he had suspected, everything was unfolding according to plan. Narasiguo's ambitions were anything but modest. He'd quietly orchestrated a trap to wipe out the Iwagakure Jonin deployed in the field. First, he ordered over 3/4 of the base's personnel withdrawn. Then, with the remaining Iwagakure forces surrounded, he struck. The sudden uprising among the enemy ranks was simply their reaction to being encircled. They panicked and tried to break free. Why weren't the senior ninja warned ahead of time? It all came down to haste. Only after scouts confirmed there was no flanking threat did Narasiguo move in, and by then, the engagement had already stretched on. General Shanzhong Tingfeng was out of range, and sending messengers to alert every veteran operative risked leaking the entire plan. So without ceremony, the notifications were delayed. Nathan could only shrug in frustration. What was there to say? These seasoned Jonin, once hailed as the pillars of their village, had been reduced, in a war that spanned nations, to nothing more than high-level cannon fodder. Nathan didn't need any more proof. He knew that in the end, strength was everything. No matter how murky the circumstances, a sufficiently powerful shinobi could weather any storm, hold his ground on the battlefield and wait for the tide to turn. Those lacking that power had only themselves to blame. As he pondered this, while listening to Shanzhong Tingfeng's briefing, 2 injured rock ninjas slipped away through the chaos. Nathan flicked a glance after them, weighing the choice to give chase. Then he recalled Narashishui's orders. Hold position, coordinate with the other squads, and seal off every escape route. With a soft click, he sheathed his short sword and began issuing commands to the nearby Konoha shinobi, positioning them to encircle and crush any survivors. 2 hours later, the fight was over. It had unfolded with brutal simplicity. Almost every elite rock ninja lay dead on the field, and fewer than 10 had managed to slip through the net. Nathan surveyed the aftermath, already calculating their next move. Despite their elite reputation, the moment the rock ninja squad walked into Narashishui's trap, their fate was sealed. Unaware of her ambush until they were already surrounded, they found themselves hopelessly outmatched. True, these rock ninjas were skilled fighters, but the Konoha shinobi they'd pursued here were just as formidable. Shisui compounded the enemy's disadvantage by dispatching nearly 3/4 of the fortress's garrison to reinforce her trap. Overwhelmed by numbers and forced to fight in exhaustion, the rock ninjas fought bravely, but ultimately could only exact a few more casualties before being wiped out. Most of them fell on the field. Nathan knelt beside the young ninja he had mortally wounded and shook his head. "You didn't make it," he murmured softly. Next to the youth lay the body of a middle-aged rock ninja, the very one who, moments before dying, had used his own body to shield the younger comrade. But against an onslaught this large, even his sacrifice couldn't turn the tide. Nathan felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. If he fell, who else could carry this burden? He was lost in thought, brooding over the latest skirmish, when a young Konoha Chunin hurried up to him and saluted crisply. "Jonin Nathan," he said, voice steady, Captain Nara requests your presence in the conference room in 1 hour. Nathan glanced at the setting sun. 1 hour? He rubbed the back of his neck. Understood. He had questions of his own, questions about the sudden assault by the Iwagakure shinobi. Something about their attack didn't add up. Since Nathan's reputation as the ghost sword had spread, every mid- and lower-rank rock ninja in nearby outposts knew his face, and none of them had been eager to tangle with him. Yet on the battlefield, of the 4 Chunin he'd encountered, only one recognized him. That could only mean these troops weren't locals. To make matters worse, their skill level was noticeably lower than that of standard Iwa operatives, which told Nathan they had outside backing. He'd get to the bottom of it, starting at that meeting. Nathan sat back, frowning. The hidden rock village was already feeling the squeeze from both the sand and the cloud. So how could they possibly spare any shinobi to reinforce this mission? There had to be some crucial piece of information he was missing, something that would make sense of the rock village's choice. He glanced at his watch. This after, Renoon's council meeting would, he hoped, finally clear up his doubts. Chapter 203. The Gathering. Nathan paused at the edge of the clearing, steeling himself against the swirl of thoughts in his mind. With the council meeting still an hour away, he couldn't afford to squander a single moment, especially not when it came to sharpening his skills. He turned briskly toward the makeshift triage area, resolved to hone his palm immortal technique. Though he'd just reached level 6, the jump to level 7 demanded 10,000 proficiency points. Relying solely on battlefield experience would be agonizingly slow. Every spare moment counted. He reminded himself that forgoing his usual Yang escape chakra conditioning wasn't a setback. It was merely postponing one form of training in favor of another. Sharpening the blade never delays the woodcutter's labor, and the sooner he broke through, the stronger his technique would become. The wounded had already been laid out beneath canvas tents, and a team of medic ninjas bustled from patient to patient. Nathan slipped easily into their ranks. He knelt beside a soldier with a deep gash across his thigh, closed his eyes to focus chakra, and let the healing currents flow. Tendons knitted, blood clots stilled, and the soldier barely flinched. A nearby medic glanced up, nodded in acknowledgement, then returned to suturing a puncture wound in another ninja's side. No one questioned Nathan's presence. His reputation spoke for itself. As he moved from patient to patient, Nathan's mind grew quiet, his entire being centered on guiding chakra with absolute precision. By the time the hour had nearly elapsed, Nathan had clocked countless repetitions of the palm immortal technique. He rose, wiped a smudge of blood from his palm, and offered a brief salute to the remaining medics. Their mutual respect needed no words. He glanced skyward. The council was about to convene. With his technique sharpened and his resolve solid, Nathan stepped away from the wounded, ready to face whatever awaited him at the meeting. They'd grown used to Nathan dropping in to help at a moment's notice. Time ticked by as he worked, and about 50 minutes later he finished his treatment, exchanged a few words with the medical squad leader, then headed straight for the meeting room. On the way, he opened his status panel and glanced at his stats. His proficiency in the palm immortal technique had just jumped by 120 points. Not bad, he thought with a small smile. Pocketing the panel, he strode into the room. Several jonin were already seated when he arrived. At the sight of him, they all straightened up, offering respectful nods and even greeting him by name. Nathan sensed a subtle shift in their demeanors, an unexpected warmth mixed with something else. Was that fear? He paused for a moment, then realized the truth. The only thing that could unsettle these veteran shinobi was sheer power, and he demonstrated plenty of that in the recent battle. His encirclement and suppression tactics must have left a deeper impression than he'd thought. Nathan had spent nearly all his time lying low, waiting for chances to harvest chakra whenever he could. That patience was rewarded and tested when a squad of Iwagakure jonin suddenly surrounded him. The fight was brutal but brief. He cut down 4 of them and left a 5th gravely injured. To be fair, only 2 of the fallen were true jonin. The other 2 were special jonin, shinobi granted extraordinary abilities. Still, no one could deny Nathan's strength. Unsurprisingly, word of his victory spread fast, and with it, envy. Nathan reminded himself that concealing his full power had been the wiser course. Now that the record of this battle existed, jealousy ran deep. If he'd actually slain those two real Iwagakure Jonin, it wouldn't be mere envy he'd provoke, but revenge. Allies of the Uchiha clan might stay out of it, but enemies, and there were plenty who held grudges, would surely seize any excuse to strike back. Thinking about that made Nathan break out in a cold sweat. He no longer looked forward to their next confrontation. All he wanted was to return refine every technique and further fortify his strength. Only then, he believed, could he walk into any battle and any trap with complete peace of mind. Nathan sat quietly, convincing himself that leaving now would only cause more trouble. Fortunately, he didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, Nara Shisui, the meeting's chair, entered the room. Taking his place at the head of the table, he rapped the wood sharply to call the gathering to order. First, Nara began, let's review the human cost of our recent engagement. We can discuss equipment losses and captures later. They pale in comparison to what I'm about to report. He flipped through a few papers. According to our field reports, we eliminated 93 rock ninjas. That number breaks down to 18 jonin, 11 of whom were special jonin, 63 chunin, and a dozen jinin. For a single outpost, that's a remarkable achievement. And given that this was our home ground, we held every advantage. Had the enemy pushed this hard at any other stronghold, they likely would have overwhelmed the defenders entirely. Remember, the backbone of this position wasn't just any troops. It was the elite vanguard that spearheaded last month's counteroffensive. Nara paused, letting the weight of those words sink in before moving on to the next item on the agenda. After several more fierce engagements, they finally shattered the Stone Shinobi's assault team, yet the cost was steep. When Shisui Nara rose to report the tally, his tone was grave. In this campaign, we lost 8 jonin, 46 chunin, and 32 jinin killed in action, with nearly 60 more wounded, some critically. A heavy silence fell over the room, 86 lives gone, almost matching the enemy's own grim total. By sheer numbers, it was a bleak, Pyrrhic victory. True, the Stone Shinobi had suffered more jonin losses, but their overall casualties were painfully high as well. After a long pause, Shisui spoke again. Despite everything, we owe our success to one jonin in particular, Nathan. Every head snapped toward Nathan. He blinked, bewildered. What could he possibly have done to deserve that credit? Nara Shisui leaned forward in his chair and spoke in a clear, steady voice. If Nathan hadn't held the line in those opening moments, single-handedly fending off the Iwagakure Jonin, cutting down several of their elite, and tying up 2 more, our losses would have been far worse. A ripple of agreement swept through the room. It was undeniable. The deadliest phase of the battle had been that initial stand, where 80% of their casualties had fallen. Later, during the encirclement and suppression, the sheer number of allied shinobi meant that even the wounded could be carried away and treated. Fatalities had been comparatively few. In those crucial first minutes, Nathan's efforts had been the keystone of their defense. Nathan met Shishui's gaze across the table, searching for any hint of sarcasm behind the cool mask of his expression. Perhaps he was overthinking it. He cleared his throat and replied softly, I did only what was necessary. The real heroes of this victory are the 86 comrades who gave their lives. They exchanged their futures for our chance to win this day. A respectful hush settled over the assembly. Nathan's measured words stemmed the tide of exaggeration before it even began. Upon hearing Nathan's proposal, Nara Shishui's eyes widened in surprise. After offering a few additional clarifications, she turned to the second item on the agenda, reinforcing their defenses. The Rock Ninja had just suffered a crushing defeat, and everyone agreed they would not concede defeat easily. A fresh, unexpected assault, followed by second and third waves, was all but inevitable. Their village's safety now depended on an ironclad defense. Ideas flew around the room as each council member contributed suggestions. Within minutes, they had pieced together a layered strategy of lookouts, patrol routes, barrier reinforcements, and rapid response squads. Satisfied, Nara Shisui looked over the plan one last time. Excellent, she declared. We'll implement this without delay. The meeting drew to a close, but before dismissing everyone, Nara Shisui fixed the gathered shinobi with a serious gaze. Now came the moment they'd all been waiting for, Why had the rock ninja suddenly launched such a massive raid? With a steady voice, she prepared to unveil the shocking answer. Chapter 204, Troubling News. The War Council gathered in the dimly lit tent, its air heavy with anticipation. Nara Surabaya rose from his seat and unrolled a fresh scroll, his expression grave. According to our latest intelligence from the base camp, he began, Sunagakure has postponed its offensive against Iwagakure. Their supply lines have broken down entirely. A stunned silence fell over the room. Does that mean Iwagakure struck first? One of the younger shinobi ventured, brow furrowed. Surabaya shook his head. No, Iwagakure's logistics remain untouched. Sunagakure simply can't support the campaign. They can't even hold their own western defenses, let alone launch a full-scale assault. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembled ninjas. Are you saying one of the 5 great ninja villages is on the brink of collapse, purely because of supply issues? Surabaya's gaze swept the room. Yes, their desert caravans are bogged down by sandstorms, and their forges can't keep up with weapons repairs. Without food, arms, and reinforcements, they're hemorrhaging strength. I fear they won't survive much longer in this conflict. Shock registered on every face. Sunagakure's warriors were legendary for their endurance in harsh conditions, yet now it was logistics that threatened to bring them to their knees. If they fall, Surabaya concluded quietly, the entire balance of power in this war will shift overnight. We must prepare for the consequences. As the council members digested the news, a profound unease settled over them. The coming days would determine not only the fate of Sunagakure, but the course of the entire shinobi world. Though logistics are the backbone of any war, in ninja conflicts raw manpower often matters more. With enough soldiers, even a cut-off supply line can be offset by raiding enemy territory for provisions. It's only when your own ranks run thin that logistics truly become a fatal weakness. Right now, however, Sunagakure isn't facing a troop shortage. Though it fields the smallest army of the 5 great ninja villages, its shinobi maintain a higher average combat ability, and the puppet masters have proved ruthlessly effective. Over the last 2 years of war, Sunagakure's losses have been lighter than those of the other villages, leaving its reserves comparatively robust. That strength is precisely why its logistical crisis is so alarming. A village with ample forces should, by theory, be able to absorb shortfalls in supplies. In practice, though, Sunagakure's supply lines have collapsed completely. When you have the men but no food, ammunition, or replacement gear, even the most disciplined troops can't sustain a campaign. And at this moment, Sunagakure's logistics have hit rock bottom. In the end, the steady accumulation of small gains had triggered a larger shift in Sunagakure's strategy. What once had been routine promotions and internal debates now carried real weight. Every Jonin candidate realized that the village's future hinged on more than personal rank. Everyone in the meeting understood this. Everyone except Nathan, who saw even further. If Sunagakure's supply lines and reserves were already stretched so thin, then the village's entire war effort was on the brink of collapse. Nathan wasn't the only one who drew that conclusion. Luosha, the village's de facto leader, faced a grim reality. Sunagakure simply could not sustain another campaign against Kirigakure. Supplies were dwindling, morale was faltering, and shinobi were returning from the front lines, exhausted and wounded. So when Nathan proposed opening negotiations, even at the cost of betraying Sunagakure's greatest hero, Shuo Dunyekang, Luosha gripped the hard choice by its only edge. It wasn't personal vendetta or a purge of dissenters. It was a last-ditch effort to save what remained of the hidden village. The proof of Sunagakure's desperation came just days later at the crossroads of the Three Nations, where Konoha's Ino-Shikacho team arrived bearing a peace treaty. They came as neutral envoys, but the wreck, Epshin in Iwagakure, was icy. A faction of hardline Iwa shinobi, determined to keep the war burning, prepared to sabotage the talks at any cost. Tensions flared. Swords were drawn. That's when Luosha appeared, flanked by a contingent of elite Sunagakure operatives. With a calm but forceful voice, he reminded the would-be saboteurs that they stood on the soil of the Wind Kingdom, neutral ground under Wind authority. Any violent act here would be an affront to the very kingdom that had hosted their meeting. Caught off guard, the Iwa radicals hesitated, and in that moment, the summit remained intact. By staking Tsunagakure's reputation on the Wind Kingdom's neutrality, Luosha secured a fragile truce. The peace treaty advanced, and for the first time, it seemed possible that the cycle of conflict could be broken. Yet behind that diplomatic victory lay Nathan's and Luosha's bitter acknowledgement. To save their people, they had sacrificed a hero. And in a world where even an honorable battlefield could demand such a price, every victory felt like a loss. At last, Iwagakure and Konohagakure signed a peace treaty. It was clear that Tsunagakure, above all the great ninja villages, had the greatest interest in ending the war, or it never would have inserted itself so forcefully into the negotiations. The more Nathan thought about it, the more it made sense. After traveling so far and witnessing the devastation firsthand, he was finally convinced the war might be drawing to a close. But Nathan also knew that the darkest hour comes just before dawn, and the calmest seas can conceal the fiercest storms. If this conflict were truly to end, it would take more than empty pledges. It would demand painful sacrifices and perhaps terrible battles yet to come. It was far too soon to celebrate. Pulling himself back from hopeful daydreams, Nathan turned to Nara Shikamaru, who stood lost in thought. Even if Tsunagakure scales back its offensive, he said, there's still Kumogakure to consider. Shouldn't Iwagakure be shifting troops east toward the Lightning Country? His question cut through the relieved murmur that had settled over the room. One by one, the other shinobi exchanged sober looks. After the onslaught at Union Village, an assault so brutal that no one would dare underestimate its impact, every officer in that hall knew Nathan's warning was more than valid. The war might be pausing for now, but its greatest threats still loomed on the horizon. Logically, if Iwagakure still has troops to spare, they'd be concentrating on Union Village. So why launch a sudden strike against us? Every face in the room turned toward Nara Surabaya, waiting for his explanation. He ran a hand through his hair and shook his head. According to our latest reports, the power struggle for the fourth Raikage candidate in Kumogakure has reached a fever pitch. Union's frontline forces have essentially stood down. Hostilities between them and Kumogakure are at a stalemate. The gathered shinobi fell silent. In that hush, they realized the grim truth. The attack on their outpost might just be the beginning, and the hidden leaf itself could soon be in the crosshairs. Surabaya inhaled sharply before delivering the final blow. HQ just sent word 10 minutes ago. It isn't only our fort that's under assault. Several others have been hit simultaneously. Some are still holding out. Others have already fallen. A heavy weight settled over the room as each ninja absorbed the news. The war they thought confined to distant lands was now at their doorstep, and it threatened to engulf the entire village. Nathan's heart pounded. The time for half measures was over. A grizzled jonin ran a hand through his hair and let out a weary sigh. It looks like Iwagakure is about to force us to give back everything we've won over the last month. He was right. For weeks they had exploited Iwagakure's shortage of reinforcements, launched a swift offensive, and carved out a large swath of enemy territory. Now that Yanyan Village's forces were finally available, they were coming straight at them. If you ask me, another jonin spoke up, we should just abandon the new ground. Our counterattack from base camp didn't hit every target, but it was still a success. We pull back to our original stronghold, dig in there, and let the Iwa shinobi come to us. A murmur of agreement rippled around the table. That makes sense, one of them said. There's another benefit to retreating. Our supply lines would be much shorter. After seeing Tsunagakure slow down its offensive because of logistics, I've been uneasy about our own provision lines. If the Awagakure ninja bypass our forward position and cut us off at the rear, we'll be in real trouble. They all fell silent, eyes drifting over the map. The decision was clear. Better to trade ground now than risk being starved out later. Don't forget, one officer warned, this is their territory. They know exactly where they can move and where they can't. They'll slip past our surveillance without a trace. I say we pull back for now. A ripple of agreement spread through the room, but so did dissent. Voices rose and fell like a busy market until Nara Surabaya finally raised her hand for silence. Enough, she said firmly. Strategic decisions are for the third generation and Orochimaru-sama. It's not our place to debate withdrawal. We stick to our orders and do our jobs. Her words cut through the chatter. A hush fell as everyone exchanged thoughtful glances. Then, with a brief nod, Nara Surabaya dismissed the meeting. The officers gathered their notes and filed out. Nathan lingered only a moment in the doorway. Before anyone could call after him, he activated his blinking technique and vanished. His former comrades looked around in surprise, wondering what urgency had driven him off so abruptly. The answer was simple: training. Nathan's practice regimen for the day was far from complete, and he refused to waste a single second. Chapter 205, Promotion and Plan Time, moves like a galloping stallion. Before he knew it, 5 days had slipped by. As expected, the Iwa Shinobi launched several counterattacks during that time. However, thanks to thorough preparations and the heavy losses the enemy suffered 5 days earlier, these subsequent assaults were half-hearted at best. They posed little real threat. Nathan's training, though, took a slight hit. Every skirmish forced him to pause. Techniques he might have mastered yesterday slipped to today's agenda. Deep within the hidden base, Nathan sat cross-legged on a raised platform. He formed hand seals deliberately, as though he were still a novice. Gathering chakra at the nape of his neck, he activated the Genjutsu Sharingan. The moment it flared to life, he probed its power, each iteration enriching his understanding, each repetition honing his control. He completed the seal, released the technique, absorbed the spark of insight, and then began again, quietly, insistently. Over and over, Nathan cycled through the same motions, mining every nuance of the Sharingan's illusionary prowess. With every use, his skill increased, and fresh revelations emerged. Bit by bit, those small increments of progress accumulated, until they coalesced into a decisive breakthrough. By evening, his forehead protector lay discarded at his side, sweat glistening on his brow. Yet in his deep-set eyes burned a sharper focus. The gap between quantity and quality had at last snapped shut, granting him a new level of mastery and setting the stage for the plans to come. Nathan's eyes flashed with the Sharingan illusion once more, and at that instant a flood of understanding overwhelmed him. Knowledge poured in so fast and furious that he felt himself drown in it, slipping into a trance that lasted who knew how long. When he finally came back, everything inside him had shifted. He lifted his right hand and without a single hand sign pointed forward with one finger. There was no dramatic swirl of energy, no visible spark, but Nathan sensed the illusion had taken hold. In the past, he'd needed intricate seals to activate it. Now it sprang to life as instinct, triggered by the slightest gesture. "Is it complete?" he murmured, flexing and then retracting his finger. Under his breath he added, "Panel!" Almost immediately, the familiar pale blue curtain of light shimmered into being, settling around him like a protective shell. Nathan activated his personal status display and surveyed the figures that floated before him. Age 12, Constitution 12, Spirit 15, Chakra Reserves 21,500, previously 29,236, 31,700. Bloodline, Uchiha Sharingan 3 Magatama, 9,999/10,000. He scrolled through his cultivated skills one by one, watching each progress bar inch forward. Chakra Refining Technique, Level 5, 212/5,000. Wind Escape, Wind Blade, Level 2, 112/500. Shadow Clone Technique, Level 3, 181,000. Chakra Absorption Technique, Level 5, 1,008,000. Rasengan, Level 4, 6 of 4 to 2,000. Palm Magic, Level 6, 1,865 10,000. Chakra Scalpel, Level 4, 495 2,000. Art of Reflecting the Heart, Level 7, 4,885 20,000. Swordsmanship, Level 6, 5,120. Chakra Control, Level 4, 1,574 2,000. Beneath those, the foundations of his most advanced jutsu sat at maximum rank. 3 Body Technique, Level 3. Instantaneous Body Technique, Level 4. Ninja Tool Throwing, Level 5. Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique, Level 5. Fire Escape, Huge Fireball Technique, Level 5. Fire Escape Dragonfire Technique, Level 5. Wind Escape Great Breakthrough, Level 5. Magic Shackle Technique, Level 5. Illusion, Sharingan, Level 7. Healing, Level 5. Nathan paused and fixed his gaze on the final entry. Genjutsu, Sharingan, Level 7. Mastery complete with no further progress possible. A quiet thrill ran through him. Every skill he had honed, and every trial he had endured, culminated in this perfect, unbreakable illusion technique. With that thought, he closed the status display, determination blazing in his eyes. As Nathan had anticipated, his Genjutsu Sharingan was now flawless. With nothing more than a casual flick of his wrist, he could unleash the full power of his illusionary eye, proof that the technique had reached perfection. From this point on, most Jonin simply wouldn't be a match for him. Of course, a perfected Genjutsu Sharingan doesn't guarantee an effortless one-shot victory over every opponent. Before the Sharingan evolves into the Mangekyo, a seasoned Jonin who recognizes an illusion can still break free from its grasp. That's why Nathan relied on more than just his eyes. He developed complementary skills and strategies to lock down even the most battle-hardened shinobi. And once his 3 Tomoe Sharingan blossoms into the Mangekyo, a single glance will be enough to ensnare any Jonin. Just as Uchiha Itachi later trapped a powerhouse like Kasame with one subtle movement of his eye. Nathan stared at the kaleidoscope for a moment, then glanced over at his 3 Magatama Sharingan. The bloodline gauge read 9,999 out of 10,000. He closed his eyes and shook his head. As much as he wanted to force the final breakthrough, he knew better than to rush. With no immediate threat bearing down on him, there was no need to risk everything now. He'd wait for the physique attribute to surface before pushing any further. Shifting his focus, Nathan reviewed the other techniques he'd already perfected. 5 days ago, he'd brought both Fire Release, Dragon Flame Technique, and Fire Release, Fireball Technique to their ultimate form. That same investment of 5,000 chakra into the Fireball Technique had doubled his daily chakra recovery rate. What would normally have taken 10 days to master, he'd achieved in half the time. Then, sometime before nightfall, he'd taken the first step toward unlocking Genjutsu Sharingan and driven it straight to perfection. With that final breakthrough, he also completed Wind Escape, Grand Breach, fully mastering both the shape and nature of Wind Nature Chakra. Now, with 3 perfected Sharingan and 3 flawless elemental techniques at his command, and with the physique attribute still waiting to emerge, Nathan felt no urgency. He'd bide his time, cultivate his strength, and await the next spark in his endless ascent. Nathan focused intently, channeling his chakra through the Wind Escape Great Breakthrough technique one more time. The storm he unleashed now raged with twice the intensity it ever had before. Even more important, the surge of power granted him a hidden bonus. Any skill linked to Wind Escape would see its mastery level double. That meant if he redirected the 10,000 chakra points he'd already invested in Wind Escape Great Breakthrough into Wind Escape Wind Blade, he could break through to level 5 in under 2 weeks and gain a new trump card in his arsenal. Yet Nathan knew better than to chase every advantage at once. He had bigger priorities. First, his Genjutsu Sharingan had just matured into its perfect state. At the same time, his sword technique had advanced to the next tier. Together, these developments satisfied the prerequisites for his long-awaited illusion sword technique. He was finally ready to begin its actual formulation, and he planned to tackle it alongside the related instant sword technique. Thanks to his deep understanding of Wind Chakra's malleability, he could shape both its form and nature at will. A proper sword would be ideal, of course, but in its absence, he could refine the new techniques using only the dagger he always carried. Over the coming days, Nathan would split his training, simultaneously experimenting with the subtle illusions of the blade and the lightning-quick strikes of the instant sword. With his eyes set on those twin breakthroughs, Nathan closed his fist around the dagger's hilt. This time, neither gale nor shadow would stand in his way. Nathan's heart raced with excitement at the thought. He urgently wanted to know whether the proficiency panel could help him cultivate these sword techniques. If it could, might forge his own path. If not, he'd be forced to follow the footsteps of those who came before him. Still, Nathan couldn't shake his optimism. After all, every skill on the panel had once been developed by predecessors. There was no reason his efforts wouldn't bear the same fruit. Drawing a steadying breath, Nathan set his mind to work. Relying on his earlier inspirations and personal understanding of the blade, he began tentatively sketching out the fundamentals of his illusion sword technique. Chapter 206, Success. A week had passed in the blink of an eye. This afternoon, in the dense woods on the west side of the stronghold, Nathan stood alone, his short sword held firmly in hand. Before him were 3 seasoned Konoha Chunin, each determined to test their mettle against the newcomer. At first, the clash was even. Blades rang against blades in a flurry of steel, footwork, and sharp parries. Nathan moved with calm precision, darting in to strike, then slipping away just as quickly. His opponents recovered swiftly, coordinating their attacks in a seamless dance of offense and defense. But battle slips when hesitation takes hold. Without warning, one Chunin's foot faltered and his arms stiffened. He froze in place, eyes wide with shock. In that instant, Nathan's dagger drove forward, aiming straight for the immobilized Shinobi. Before the blade could find its mark, a second Chunin leapt in to intercept, his forearms snapping up just in time to deflect Nathan's strike. Simultaneously, the third Chunin seized his chance. From behind, he plunged a gleaming kunai into Nathan's back, close enough to pierce armor and heart in one deadly motion. A jolt of danger flared through Nathan's veins. Mid-twist, he caught the glint of steel at his spine. Reacting on instinct, he summoned the hidden reserves of his wind-escape chakra and poured it into his dagger. A pale green aura blossomed around the blade, humming like a living thing. Nathan felt the power flow through him, binding his body and weapon into a single, lethal force. With a controlled exhalation, he flexed his wrist. The dagger's tip snapped forward like a coiling spring, aimed not at his chest, but at the Chunin who dared to block him. In that moment of crackling energy and razor-sharp intent, success felt inevitable. Nathan braced himself for the counterstrike, every muscle honed and ready, the wind's power singing at his command. Nathan's green chakra flared in an instant, and he vanished mid-stride, sword in hand. Before anyone could react, he reappeared directly behind Ono Seita, dagger pressed against Seita's spine. At that sight, the 2 Konoha Chunin dropped their weapons with a clatter and raised their hands in surrender. "Captain," one said breathlessly, "your instant sword technique is just too fast. We can't keep up." "Yes," the other agreed, eyes wide. "And your illusion sword technique, it's even more powerful. Is Chengta still out cold?" They both glanced at Ono Seita, who stood perfectly still, frozen by Nathan's illusion. In the week since their last encounter, Nathan had refined 2 deadly skills, the illusion sword technique, which immobilized the target's mind, and the instant sword technique, which let him disappear and reappear in the blink of an eye. As the first Chunin had pointed out, his wind release enhancement made him unnaturally swift, but it wasn't true teleportation. It was sheer mastery of speed and perception that left his opponents no time to react. Nathan stood calmly, sheathing his dagger as his 2 subordinates fidgeted beside him. To the mid-level genin, the distinctions between speed and space-time teleportation barely registered, both moved faster than the eye could follow. But before a jonin, the gap was vast. Blinding speed still left a trace, something a skilled tracker could exploit. Teleportation, by contrast, was untouchable without specialized countermeasures. Nathan had pushed his instant sword technique so far that, at close range, his strikes rivaled a blink-and-you'll-miss-it teleport. Still, blink strikes weren't true space-time jumps. With a cool nod, Nathan dispelled the illusion that had ensnared Seita Ono. Ono blinked back to reality, kunai snapping up in a defensive grip. Then, noticing Nathan flanked by 2 grinning teammates, he could only let out a rueful laugh. "You got me again, didn't you?" The pair shrugged, their smirk saying everything. Nathan's trick worked, once more. "All right, you 3 can head off and train on your own now." Having wrapped up the day's routine drills, Nathan wasn't in the mood to hang around. He waved them away. "Understood, Captain," the trio chorused, linking arms as they strolled off together. Once they disappeared around the corner, Nathan pulled up his proficiency panel, curiosity gleaming in his eyes. The moment after the battle, a familiar pale blue curtain of light shimmered into view. Across its surface, Nathan's status panel updated itself in a soft cascade of numbers and text. Name, Uchiha Nathan, age 12 constitution, 12 spirit, 15 chakra, 2733,268. Bloodline, Sharingan, 3 Magatama, 999 10,000. Skills, Chakra Refining Technique, Louver 5, 261 5000. Wind Escape, Windblade, 4th, 752,000. Shadow Clone Technique, Lever 3, 290,000. Chakra Absorption Technique, Lever 5, 1,925,000. Rasengan Eve, 4, 1,392,000. Palm Magic, Lev 6, 3,727, 10,000. Chakra Scalpel, Lever 4, 2. Art of Reflecting the Heart, Lev 7, 4,185, 20,000. Swordsmanship, Lev 6, 1,350 to 10,000. Illusion Sword Technique, 25,500. Instant Sword Technique, 160, 200. Chakra Control, Level 4, 1,805,2. Perfect Skills. Nathan stared at the list, hardly believing his eyes. Just a week ago, those last two, Illusion Sword Technique and Instant Sword Technique, weren't even on his panel. Yet now, thanks to his recent breakthroughs, the system had automatically absorbed them and begun leveling them up through sheer practice. He closed his eyes, letting the data wash over him. Every technique, every surge of chakra was a step closer to mastering his clan's most coveted abilities. And with the Sharingan's power so near its limit, Nathan knew that even greater challenges lay ahead. But for the moment, he allowed himself a small, determined smile. The journey had only just begun. Nathan's progress was staggering. He'd mastered the new technique in mere days, whereas most shinobi spend months or even years honing a single ninjutsu until they can wield it reliably. In just a few days, Nathan had already reached level 2 proficiency. No longer a novice, but truly competent. The gap between him and his peers was astonishing. This rapid advancement meant Nathan could customize his jutsu to suit his own style, carving out a path that belonged solely to him. For a while, his mind brimmed with daring ideas, but he immediately quelled them. His current base of knowledge remained too limited. After all, the only reason he'd even managed to devise the illusion sword technique and the instant sword technique in the first place was thanks to his illusion Sharingan, his solid swordsmanship foundation, and his wind-style breakthrough. To hope for even more advanced ninjutsu at this stage would be nothing but wishful thinking. As the proverb reminds us, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and countless streams combine to form a mighty river. Without steady accumulation, even the most brilliant ideas remain castles in the air. At this stage, Nathan knew better than to chase grand visions. His priority was to master the solid groundwork laid by those who came before him. Only then could he hope to forge his own path. He inhaled deeply, held the breath, and exhaled in a long, controlled stream. Opening his eyes, he closed the training console and, having centered himself, moved on to the next skill in his regimen. 30 minutes later, his rest period ended. Nathan concluded his practice, called over 3 subordinates, and led them out on patrol. By the time the mission wrapped up, the sky was a deepening dusk. Back at main base, Nathan confirmed there were no outstanding duties. He left behind a shadow clone to maintain appearances, then slipped away to his secret training chamber. There, hidden from prying eyes, he plunged into another round of intense practice, determined to turn small steps into great strides. Nathan had mastered several new techniques over the past weeks, freeing him from spending precious hours on their practice. Yet his daily chakra quota remained unchanged, and he couldn't afford to let any of it go to waste. Every ounce was funneled into developing other skills, which meant his overall training schedule stayed as grueling as ever. Time was still in short supply. Nathan squeezed in rest where he could, managing only 4 hours of sleep each night, but he'd grown accustomed to the relentless pace. A life filled with constant effort and steady progress didn't feel burdensome, it felt purposeful. And with that thought, another day slipped away. Chapter 207, Evacuation. 3 days later, early February, Nathan sensed subtle but unmistakable changes in his body. After more than half a month of focused training, he could feel an unseen force guiding his muscles and energy channels toward a higher, more perfect state. He knew this was the sign he'd been waiting for. His physique attribute was on the verge of a breakthrough. At the rate he was progressing, he estimated it would fully upgrade within a week. When that happened, both his chakra capacity and his natural recovery rate would surge, and the narrowing gap between his physique and spiritual attributes would put him one step closer to safely unlocking the Mangekyo Sharingan. Just as Nathan was settling in to wait out the final days of his transformation, an urgent announcement arrived, upending all his plans. Early morning, Central Command. A large meeting room stood empty, but for a long table. Narashishui tapped the holopad in front of him, having just finished reading the directive from headquarters. An aide, barely able to contain his curiosity, leaned forward. "Captain Nara, what's happening?" Shishui looked up, his brow furrowed. "We've been ordered to evacuate the entire sector at once. Enemy activity has spiked beyond our forecasts. Prepare the teams. Everyone moves out within the hour." The aide's eyes widened. "But the civilians, what about the people still stranded behind the front lines?" Shishui pressed his fingers together, weighing the gravity of each word. "Evacuation takes priority. We'll deploy every available squadron to escort them. No one's left behind." Murmurs rose around the table as officers exchanged tense glances. Nathan, seated among them, clenched his fists. His training and the breakthrough he'd been so close to would have to wait. Right now, lives depended on his speed, his judgment, and his will to see this mission through. "Let's move," Shishui ordered. "Time is our enemy." With that, the meeting room emptied in a flurry of activity. Nathan rose from his seat, the hidden power in his veins stirring as if in response to the urgency. The moment he'd prepared for, a test of body and spirit, had arrived after all, and this time, it wasn't about unlocking a new technique. It was about saving lives. Why on earth did headquarters suddenly order a retreat? "No kidding," someone muttered from the back. "They want us to abandon this outpost and fall back to Fengliu Town's fortifications, immediately, supposedly to reinforce the garrison there against an impending attack." Another officer frowned. "But Fengliu is behind us. If it's under threat, we're even more exposed here. And there's been nothing out of the ordinary, no major skirmishes, no unusual troop movements. What could have changed so fast?" All eyes turned to Commander Nara Shishui, waiting for an explanation. She squared her shoulders and spoke with measured seriousness. "We just received word that several neighboring strongholds have been breached." A stunned hush fell over the room. "Breached? How is that possible?" one of the junior officers exclaimed. "These fortresses exchange daily reports. Just yesterday, everything was stable. Aside from routine patrol clashes, there was no indication of any serious threat. And now, overnight, they've all fallen?" Narashishui nodded grimly. "That's what the message says. We have to assume the threat is advancing quickly. Our position here could be cut off if we don't move now." The officers exchanged worried looks. There was little time to question orders. Gathering their gear, they braced themselves for the forced withdrawal, a retreat that might be the only thing standing between the enemy and Fengliu Town. Nara Shishui's face grew serious. There was no room for jokes. One of the shinobi broke the silence and asked, "What happened out there?" "According to HQ," Nara Shishui began, "last night's raid on Hidden Rock Village prompted them to unleash both the Four-Tails Jinchuriki and the Five-Tails Jinchuriki. On top of that, they sent in elite squads from their demolition corps." A stunned "what?" echoed through the group, quickly followed by an incredulous, "Both Four-Tails and Five-Tails? And the demolition corps too?" Each of those assets alone, a tailed beast host or the Rock Village's crack demolition teams, could single-handedly devastate a shinobi unit. Combined, they were virtually unstoppable. Whispers spread among the assembled ninja. Are they gearing up for a full-blown counterattack? They've thrown every heavyweight into this fight. Until now, their outpost had been tucked into a recessed section of the rear defense line, thought to be a relatively safe fallback. But with both tailed beasts and elite sapper squads in play, even that haven felt dangerously exposed. Nearby outposts have already fallen, and our position has become dangerously exposed, a perfect target for the Hidden Rock Ninja Army. No wonder headquarters has ordered an immediate withdrawal. If we don't pull back now, we'll be cut off for good. As the realization sank in, the meeting room fell silent. Within minutes, the officers sketched out escape routes, finalized their plans, and filed out to prepare for the retreat. Nathan had little to do. Once again assigned to the combat unit, he watched his more senior comrades hustle about with casual ease. On the surface, he looked perfectly relaxed, but inside he was quietly fuming. His physique attribute was on the verge of a breakthrough, exactly when he least needed another headache. He'd been tasked with guarding the prisoners in the hidden base, and with the retreat order, there was no way to bring them along. That would cost him over 40,000 chakra points a day, a tremendous drain, even if not all of it went into powering his palm immortal technique. Nathan clenched his fists, bracing himself for the grueling ritual ahead. But without those additional chakras, even if he poured every drop of his daily chakra recovery into strengthening his body, his physique attribute would still lag behind by 2 or 3 days. Was that trade-off worth it? Nathan paused. Committing to this choice meant that for the next 10 days or so, none of his other skills would progress. He opened his skill panel and scrolled through the list. Wind Style, Wind Blade, Rasengan, Shadow Clone Technique. None of these desperately needed upgrading right now. Their current levels were more than adequate, and they certainly didn't demand chakra as urgently as the Palm Immortal Technique did. By contrast, improving his physique was fundamental to everything else, and with chakra in short supply, it was the obvious priority. Decision made, Nathan shut his panel. His resolve firm, he redirected every ounce of chakra he could spare into bolstering his body, confident that this sacrifice would pay off in the long run. Nathan surveyed the hidden compound from the shadows. He'd already dispatched one shadow clone inside, but it couldn't send him updates, and he couldn't risk leaving the base himself. He had no choice but to create a second clone. Slipping into an unoccupied alcove, Nathan made sure no one was watching. The wind stilled as he performed the precise sequence of hand seals for the shadow clone technique. In an instant, a swirl of ethereal chakra smoke billowed into view, and where the mist cleared stood a perfect duplicate of Nathan. The clone nodded in understanding. Without a word, it melted into the darkness and slipped out toward the secret entrance to handle the guards at both front and rear. 1.5 hours later, Nathan sprinted along the forest's southwest perimeter. His lungs burned, but adrenaline kept him going, until he came to a sudden stop. 2 pulses of chakra now surged through him, and alongside them, 2 fresh streams of memories. Calmly, he reached up and brushed a leaf from his shoulder, then closed his eyes and sifted through the mental impressions. One set belonged to the clone stationed inside the base, the other belonged to the clone sent to neutralize the compound's outer sentries. As their experiences settled in, Nathan tightened his fists, ready for whatever came next. Beside him, a fellow combat team ninja noticed Nathan come to an abrupt halt and called out, "Hey, what's wrong? Did you see something?" The man's eyes swept the tree line, searching for any hidden threat. Nathan opened his mouth to say it was nothing, but before a word escaped, he caught a barely audible whoosh slicing through the air. His jaw tightened, and he spun toward the noise. "Watch out!" he shouted, launching himself toward the thick forest at the clearing's edge. The Konoha Shinobi by his side trusted Nathan's instincts implicitly. Without hesitation, he followed Nathan's lead, vanishing into the undergrowth beside him. Although the underbrush yielded no immediate sign of danger, he didn't doubt Nathan's judgment, hard won through countless missions together. Chapter 208, Acquaintance Whoosh, Whoosh, Whoosh. Dozens of kunai rained down like deadly hail, striking the very spot where Nathan had just been standing. Then a thunderous roar split the air as one kunai, rigged with a detonating talisman, erupted in a blinding flash. That blast was only the beginning. Boom, boom, boom. Successive explosions rippled outward, each one battering the forest with shockwaves so fierce that nearby trees shuddered and snapped. Some were uprooted entirely, crashing to the ground in a shower of splintered wood. Flames burst to life wherever burning talismans ignited the underbrush, turning the clearing into a swirling inferno of smoke and sparks. When the concussions finally subsided, Nathan crawled free from beneath the smashed trunk of an ancient oak. He coughed, spitting out bits of bark and dirt, then brushed aside the tangled weeds draped over his head. He rose to his feet, knees unsteady, every muscle primed for another strike. Slashing through the drifting haze, his eyes found the attackers. Dozens of shadowy figures stood at the forest's edge, arms folded, faces hidden in the smoke. They watched him in iron silence, as if sizing up their opponent before finishing him off. Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears as he squared his shoulders. This was no chance encounter. It was an invitation, and he had a choice: accept the challenge or vanish into the flames. Wind Style, Great Breakthrough. Next to Nathan, a jonin from Konoha who had also escaped the disaster, formed a series of hand seals and unleashed the technique. A roaring gust of wind tore through the haze, sweeping away smoke and dust to reveal a group of a dozen Hidden Rock Village shinobi standing at the edge of the clearing. Nathan's gaze flicked over them one by one, finally settling on the man in the center. His chakra flared far more strongly than the others, as marking him as the greatest threat. Around him stood a few fellow jonin and several elite chunin, but none of them drew Nathan's full attention. They returned his stare coolly, though it was the central figure who spoke aloud, a faint smirk curling his lips. "Impressive, Uchiha prodigy. You anticipated our ambush. Now tell me, where did we go wrong?" Nathan's jaw tightened. Anticipated your ambush, he thought, incredulous. The truth was, he'd only sensed something off, thanks to the memories his shadow clone had relayed back to him. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he narrowed his eyes, weighing his options. Detecting their trap was one thing, deciding how to respond would be another entirely. To Nathan's foes, it must have looked as if he'd uncovered their ambush beforehand. Had they pressed deeper into the woods, they might even have discovered his lack of evidence. But in truth, Nathan had found nothing. It was nothing more than a lucky misunderstanding. If his opponents hadn't been so jumpy, so convinced they'd been exposed, and launched their attack on the spot, Nathan would never have sensed danger coming. Had they waited, they'd have realized their error. But there's no if in battle, and Nathan had no intention of explaining himself. Let them draw their own conclusions. Still, the whole episode revealed a blind spot in Nathan's methods. He lacked a reliable system for large-scale reconnaissance. He vowed to correct that oversight. Keeping his expression calm, Nathan turned back to the rock-hidden ninja and said, "Go on, take your best guess." "A guess?" The ninja snarled, anger flickering behind his mask. With a sharp twist of his wrist, he signaled his men to strike. Nathan and the Konoha jonin at his side spun on their heels and bolted away. Unbeknownst to their pursuer, Nathan had subtly signaled his companion during their conversation, "Be ready to fall back." Now that they were retreating, the hidden stone shinobi's expression darkened. "After them!" he barked. "Yes, Captain!" his underlings chorused. In an instant, a dozen stone ninjas gave chase. The captain remained behind. He pressed his palms together, weaving a rapid series O.F. hand seals for an unfamiliar ninjutsu. With a powerful stomp of his right foot on the ground, he melted into the earth and vanished. Meanwhile, Nathan and the Konoha jonin relayed their coordinates to the main force as they ran. A low rumble suddenly shook the ground beneath them. They exchanged a brief glance, no words were needed, and without hesitation they split to left and right, diving clear of the tremor's epicenter and sprinting backward to put as much distance between themselves and the stone shinobi as possible. Almost the instant they began to fall back, the earth beneath their feet detonated. Soil and gravel exploded outward in a deadly spray, forcing Nathan and the others to stumble backwards for cover. "A detonating talisman?" someone whispered. Nathan shook his head, rejecting the idea as quickly as it sprang to mind. The sound and shockwave didn't fit any talisman he'd ever encountered, and they deliberately bypassed that stretch of road to avoid exactly this kind of trap. Nothing had gone off on their way in, so why now? His thoughts raced as he squinted through the swirling dust. When it finally settled, Nathan saw a lone figure standing at the edge of a newly formed crater. The man's fists were clenched, his stance unwavering. It was the jonin from the rock village, the same shinobi whose intimidating presence had set Nathan on edge just moments before. Nathan's gaze flicked from the jonin's rigid posture to the smoking earth at his feet. Whatever this was, it wasn't nearly over. Nathan suddenly paused, as though struck by a thought. He looked again at the lean figure before him, hollow cheeks a mop of brown curls, and the sight tugged at a distant memory. He swallowed and ventured, "Hiri?" The man's eyes narrowed. Hiri had been one of the Iwagakure Demolition Squad members Kabuto Yakushi resurrected during the Fourth Ninja War. His Kekkei Genkai explosion release allowed him to infuse chakra into an object and turn it into a bomb on contact. Now standing before Nathan, he seemed almost unchanged. "Do you know me?" The man, known to most as Sho, replied, his frown deepening. Sho's question confirmed Nathan's suspicion, yet excitement failed to surface. Instead, A cold knot of fear tightened in his chest. On sheer physical skill, Nathan could match any opponent in hand-to-hand combat. But Sho's explosive technique was something else entirely. Each strike a potential detonation, every touch a hidden landmine. And that, more than anything, kept Nathan on edge. Nathan crouched, studying the enormous crater at the creature's feet. The depth of that gash told him everything he needed to know. Its power was extraordinary, and any living being struck by that blade would be beyond saving. With such a devastating weapon in play, his opponent could simply match blow for blow, force Nathan to rely on his vision-blocking jutsu, watch it fail, then counterattack the moment he was exposed. As long as the enemy knew Nathan couldn't land a killing strike next, he could press the advantage, forcing Nathan to dodge or withdraw to recover. No wonder the foe had seemed so restrained. Still, being unable to deploy his vision-blocking technique didn't mean Nathan was powerless. Even the threat of his Sharingan illusions was enough to unnerve a seasoned fighter. He heard heavy footsteps pounding rapidly behind him. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan turned as if to answer the approaching adversary's question, but in that instant, he activated his Sharingan. His hand shot up, chakra flaring, as he unleashed Illusion, Sharingan. Not good, his opponent barked, instinct screaming danger. He stumbled back, desperately spinning away and clamping his eyes shut against the onrushing genjutsu. Nathan's Illusion Sharingan was already perfected at level 7, 0-0. With nothing more than a casual wave of his hand, he unleashed it so swiftly that his opponent never had a chance to react. In the blink of an eye, control was absolute. Chapter 209, Explosion and Counterattack. Nathan's move was so sudden and precise that Kari barely had time to blink, and none of Kari's teammates reacted in time to help. Cornered, Nathan had no choice but to rely on his own skill. He activated his perfected Genjutsu Sharingan, a technique he'd mastered before even awakening the Mangekyo. Still, he knew that an instant Genjutsu could never hold a battle-hardened Jonin for long, and that a mentally prepared, physically superior opponent would break free even faster. Kari was exactly that kind of Jonin. As Nathan had anticipated, Kari dispelled the illusion in a heartbeat. Seizing the opening, Nathan lunged forward, dagger poised for the kill. But at the critical moment, Kari's hand shot out. He caught the blade by the hilt and channeled a massive surge of chakra through it. There was a deafening boom as the energy exploded outward, shattering the dagger into a rain of splinters. When the dust settled, Nathan was left holding nothing but the empty hilt. Shock hammered through him. He'd never before seen his primary weapon destroyed before the real battle had even begun. Now he would have to think, fast, if he was going to turn the tables on this Jonin. Nathan froze Sho's mocking grin with a steady gaze. Without hesitation, Sho snatched the jagged fragments of the broken dagger, hurling them like shrapnel at Nathan's face. At the same moment, he lunged forward, molding chakra into a crackling aura around his left fist. With a fierce cry, he drove that fist toward Nathan's midsection. If it landed, it would shatter ribs and cripple him. Nathan felt the shards whiz past, but he never broke eye contact. In a blur of scarlet, his Sharingan snapped open, sharpening his vision to catch every nuance of Sho's attack. As the metal splinters arced overhead, he braced on his right foot and twisted sharply to the left. Sho's punch cleaved empty air, but its shockwave still slammed into Nathan's side, wrenching him backward and forcing the wind from his lungs. Gasping, Nathan forced himself upright, tasting copper in his mouth. Dust swirled around them, and Sho was already reforming chakra for the next strike. Nathan lifted his head, chest heaving, determination flickering in his bloodshot eyes. The fight was far from over. Nathan's heart pounded as he realized even a near miss from the explosive burst still packed enough force to rattle him. Before he could brace himself, Hao lunged forward again, fists whirling in a brutal left-right assault. This time, Hao remembered his earlier mistake. He avoided meeting Nathan's gaze directly, sacrificing a bit of aim for the element of surprise. But with the sheer destructive power behind each strike, precision was hardly necessary. Every blow carried the same bone-shattering threat. Trapped under that relentless barrage, Nathan had no choice but to dodge. He couldn't risk a parry or a block. One misstep, and his wrist might snap from the explosion's recoil. Never in his training had he been driven so completely onto the defensive. Yet there was no other option. Hao's technique left no opening for a counterattack, and Nathan dared not let a single fist land. It was the first time he'd found himself cornered like this, forced to fight purely for survival. Nathan's 3 Magatama Sharingan, now fully evolved, made those slow punches nothing more than annoyances. What truly irked him wasn't the damage. He could shrug off most blows, but the helplessness of being beaten without landing a counter. After slipping away from more than a dozen successive strikes, he drew a kunai from his pouch. No longer powerless, Nathan let the Sharingan guide his perception. As his adversary reared back for another swing, he spotted the slightest opening and drove the kunai home. At once, the duel shifted from Nathan on the defensive to a true back and forth. Behind him, Nathan's companion, a seasoned Konoha Jonin, wasn't idle. He had already intercepted the remaining Iwa Shinobi, forming a barrier to keep them at bay. But reinforcements from the Land of Earth were closing the gap fast. Nathan cast a quick glance over his shoulder. 1 Jonin, now outnumbered and pressed on all sides. They still held their ground, but defeat, Nathan knew, was only a matter of time unless he ended his fight quickly. We can't afford any more delays. Nathan's mind was clear as he dipped low to evade Kari's punch. In that split second, he thrust the kunai in his hand toward his opponent's heart. Only a decisive, potentially lethal strike would force Kari onto the defensive. Sensing the danger, Kari curled his arm in front of his chest, narrowly blocking the blade. Without a moment's hesitation, Nathan spread his left hand. Instantly, a dense sphere of chakra coalesced in his palm, the Muji ninjutsu known as the Rasengan. He lunged forward and drove the spinning orb straight at Kari's midsection. Alarm flared in Kari's eyes. He stumbled back, narrowly avoiding the Rasengan's impact. Seizing the opening, Nathan vaulted backward to put distance between them. He barely paused before shaping a rapid sequence of hand seals. Between his palms, a razor-sharp windblade materialized, its edges shimmering with barely contained power. This was no ordinary jutsu. It was the advanced technique he'd copied from Ohara Shuji, wind release, windblade. After days of relentless practice, Nathan's skill level had almost reached rank 5. He could now execute the technique with ease. Its combination of blinding speed, high-powered attack, and exceptional stealth made it the perfect tool for this kind of hunt. As expected, Sho never dared meet Nathan's gaze directly and failed to sense his opponent's intent until the very last moment. When Sho lunged forward again, hoping to force Nathan into close-quarters combat, he only realized his mistake at the final second and leapt aside. Too late. The wind blade sliced across his arm, carving a deep, burning gash into his left bicep. Nathan didn't hesitate. He backed away swiftly, forming hand seals in a fluid motion. With a steady breath, he unleashed a colossal fireball, the signature Uchiha ninjutsu fire style, great fireball technique. The rolling wave of heat bore down on Sho, who scrambled to the side and narrowly avoided the blast. Boom! The fireball detonated with earth-shaking force. Scorching flames fanned out in a shockwave, forcing Sho into a desperate dance of evasion as the inferno roared around him. Opposition turned to flight under that blistering onslaught, and in the sudden silence that followed, Nathan stood poised and unbowed, ready for whatever came next. Thanks to that crucial interruption, Sho could no longer close the distance, and Nathan at last allowed himself a relieved breath. Now it was his turn to take control of the fight. Unconcerned with conserving chakra, he formed hand seals in rapid succession and unleashed a deadly combo. Fire style, Phoenix Fire technique, Fire style, Great Fireball technique, Fire Poison, Dragon Fire technique, and finally Wind style, Wind Blade. Between these elemental attacks, he also tossed shuriken and kunai rigged with explosive tags, keeping Sho off balance. Even more dangerous than the jutsu themselves was Nathan's Sharingan-enhanced perception. He traced Sho's every twitch and shift, predicting his opponent's movements with uncanny precision. Each strike grew deadlier than the last. Frustration rippled across Sho's face, but he dared not meet Nathan's gaze for fear of falling under another of his illusions. When the slicing gust of windblade finally grazed his arm, Sho had no choice but to fall back. In a blur of motion, he let his hands form seals and activated the Earth Escape ninjutsu he'd used earlier in pursuit of Nathan and his allies. Crouching low, he melted into the ground and disappeared from sight. Chapter 210, Standoff. Nathan spun around the moment he realized Sho had vanished, but before he could call out, a scream split the air. He wheeled toward the sound and froze. One of his teammates stood reeling, his left forearm gone below the elbow, as a group of rock ninjas pressed their assault. Abandoning any thought of chasing Sho, Nathan activated his body flicker technique and materialized at his friend's side in an instant. He raised a kunai, clashing steel against chakra-enhanced blows, and warded off attack after attack. Narrowing his eyes, he tapped into his Sharingan and wove a genjutsu that snapped around the nearest rock ninja's mind. With his opponent paralyzed, Nathan drew a detonating talisman from his pouch and slapped it onto the ninja's armor. The fuse hissed and crackled to life. "Watch out!" a sharp-eyed enemy shouted, alerting his comrades. At that warning, the remaining rock ninjas melted back into the rocky terrain, leaving Nathan and his injured teammate alone, at least for the moment. Nathan seized his teammate's arm, kicked off the ground, and vaulted several meters back, just as the Iwagakure shinobi standing before them erupted into action. Boom! A deafening explosion ripped through the clearing, and a blazing sphere of fire materialized in midair. From its core came a muffled, anguished cry, an eerie reminder of the power packed into such jutsu. The sound lingered for a heartbeat before fading into the surrounding forest. "Damn it!" one of the Iwagakure ninjas spat, narrowing his eyes as he watched Nathan retreat. "After him!" In an instant, a squad of Iwagakure shinobi sprang into pursuit. Nathan's burden, a wounded comrade slung over his shoulder, forced him to slow his pace. He skidded to a halt and pivoted, meeting their charge head-on. With a sharp motion, he unleashed his Sharingan, weaving a genjutsu to seize control of the lead pursuer's senses. His fingers danced through hand seals so quickly they were almost a blur. "Watch out!" the captured ninja barked, though his words rang hollow under the genjutsu's sway. Desperately, he pushed his own seals, intent on countering Nathan's ninjutsu with his own. The forest air crackled as chakra gathered around him, but Nathan was faster. His seals snapped into place in the blink of an eye. He inhaled sharply, expelling an enormous fireball that roared through the trees like a molten comet. Branches ignited, and the stunned pursuers scattered to avoid the inferno, charred leaves fluttering to the ground in its wake. As the flames died down, Nathan's Sharingan faded. He steadied his breath, adjusted the wounded ally on his shoulder, and scanned the dimly lit path ahead. The Iwagakure reinforcements were regrouping. This fight was far from over. Nathan squared his shoulders, ready to press on and protect his friend at any cost. Nathan scarcely hesitated when the massive fireball hurtled toward them. The Earth ninjas abandoned their own jutsu and scattered in panic. Then came the deafening roar of the explosion. Its shockwave, laced with searing heat, raced through the nearby forest, igniting underbrush in an instant and hurling the remaining shinobi further apart. Without missing a beat, Nathan formed a fresh set of hand seals and unleashed another torrent of flame. Fire release, Phoenix fire technique. In a dazzling display, dozens of fireballs erupted from his mouth like blazing petals caught in a storm, each one guided by his will to bombard the fleeing Earth ninjas. Taken completely off guard, several shinobi could only scream as molten fire struck them. One fell, then another, then a third. Each outburst of agony cut short as they collapsed to the scorched ground. Rage flared among the survivors, and they quickly retaliated with earth and wind-based jutsu. But Nathan was utterly untroubled. Thanks to the razor-sharp perception of his Sharingan, he anticipated every attack, weaving through their techniques with effortless precision. As the Earth ninjas' spells fizzled harmlessly against empty air, Nathan readied himself for the next move. Nathan unleashed another surge of wind style, great breakthrough, abruptly cutting off the rock ninja's pursuit. With a fierce gust dying away, he scooped up his wounded teammates and slipped down the mountainside. Frustrated, the rock ninjas regrouped, ready to give chase again, when suddenly Sho burst from the earth at their feet. "Don't pursue them," Sho ordered. "Captain!" The ninjas halted instantly, snapping to attention. One of them frowned. "Sir, you really intend to let them get away?" "Let them go? Hardly," Sho replied, shaking his head. "I want those two alive." "But," another officer began, only to be cut off by Sho's upraised hand. We're too battered to handle both targets, especially Uchiha Nathan. His strength is no trifling matter. If we keep chasing, we'll only suffer needless losses. He cast his gaze back up the slope. By now, the village must have sealed off their retreat. Our orders are to relay every movement of the Konoha forces back to the village and then hold position. Soon enough, they'll close the net. By then, we can trap them all in one fell swoop. There's no need to sacrifice any more lives. A murmur ran through the assembled shinobi. They exchanged thoughtful glances, then fell silent. His plan made perfect sense. Meanwhile, on the opposite front, Nathan and his team had been racing back to base for several frantic minutes. As they neared the camp, a pair of sentries stepped forward, barring their path. Only after a rigorous identification check were they finally granted entrance. Nathan shared a tense look with the other Konoha Jonin. The camp's defenses had been fortified almost overnight, every gate locked down, every soldier at the ready. Clearly, something serious had occurred. Not long before, their squad had skirmished with a patrol of rock ninjas. And they weren't the only recon team out here. Similar reports had come in from other units. Could it be? A cold knot formed in Nathan's stomach. If his suspicion was correct, the mission ahead would be even more perilous than they'd imagined. His thoughts snapped back into focus when Nara Shishui charged over, several jonin in tow, her expression grave. "Report," she demanded, scanning Nathan's group. "What have you found?" They studied Nathan, his main weapon gone, and the jonin beside him, who'd lost half his forearm. Finally, someone asked, "So you ran into them too?" Nathan stiffened at the word too. His earlier suspicions flared. "Have the other teams been attacked as well?" Nara Shishui met his gaze and nodded gravely. "Before you returned, 3 teams came back reporting skirmishes with a small band of rock-style ninjas. 2 other teams never checked in. We fear they were wiped out. You're the 4th team to make it back." Nathan took a steadying breath, then recounted their encounter in full. As he spoke of the enemy's brutal strength, the others exchanged grim looks and exhaled sharply. It suddenly made sense. They'd narrowly escaped a fate that had already claimed other squads. Everything pointed to one chilling fact. The rock ninjas had singled them out, and this ambush had been meticulously planned. Without that dawn deployment, there'd have been no way to station our troops in time. At first, everyone was quietly relieved that Rock Village hadn't struck us overnight, but that relief was dangerously premature. Their decision to delay wasn't mercy, it was strategy. Our base sits on a rocky bluff with only one narrow approach, and our fortifications are stout. A hasty midnight raid would have bogged them down, alerted nearby strongholds, and risked a full siege. So they left us off their opening attack list. But make no mistake, Rock Village never intended to let us be. As soon as the battles elsewhere wound down, our position was singled out for destruction. Even now, they're concentrating every resource for a massive offensive. Once their preparations are complete, we'll face nothing short of a catastrophe. Chapter 211, Full Charge. No, we can't keep crawling along at this pace. Time's not on our side. We need to pick up the speed. A ripple of agreement passed through the group. Nara Surabaya weighed the situation and, finding no better alternative, gave the order. From now on, everyone toss out anything non-essential. We move at full speed. At his command, the Konoha shinobi swiftly shed their burdens. Extra rations, spare tents, even their traveling packs were abandoned along the roadside. Stripped down to the bare minimum, they pressed on without hesitation. Nara Surabaya calculated that at this pace, they could reach Fengliu Town's fortress in under 24 hours, where fresh provisions and supplies would await them. There was no reason to slow down now. Meanwhile, Nathan scanned the fallen bandits' camp for weapons. He soon claimed a short sword, not as fine as his original blade, and certainly lacking the specialized chakra-conductive metals he preferred, but serviceable enough to keep his sword techniques sharp in the next fight. Securing it to his belt, he slipped back into formation, every sense alert to their surroundings. The wind whipped around them as the ninjas pushed forward, each footfall bringing them closer to Fengliu Town, and to whatever challenges lay beyond its walls. There was no turning back now. All they could do was charge ahead. Nathan knew that techniques like the instant sword technique, those requiring perfect chakra synchronization with the blade, were out of reach for him now. If he hoped to unleash his full strength, he'd need a new primary weapon, something legendary. He thought back to the time he first developed the instant sword technique and learned of the famed kusanagi, a sword whispered about throughout the ninja world. But tracking down such a rare treasure single-handedly, especially with no leave from the front lines, was virtually impossible. Once I get back, I'll ask my clan to help me find one, he decided. With the Uchiha's extensive connections and resources, acquiring a kusanagi or similar blade shouldn't be too difficult. Besides, Nathan's rising reputation on the battlefield meant the clan would be more than willing to lend a hand. Satisfied with his plan, he dismissed the thought and rejoined his squad. He fell in beside the other shinobi, taking up a patrol around the main army. This time, they deliberately stayed close to the bulk of their forces, fully aware that Iwa ninjas might be lurking nearby. They had no intention of walking into an ambush. Nathan glanced at the horizon, where the low sun cast long shadows over the rugged terrain. He shook his head. "There's no use worrying about our position being exposed," he said. "It's inevitable now. Better to press on while Iwagakure's forces are still unprepared. At least we'll keep our losses to a minimum." The other jonin nodded in grim agreement. Nathan and his team knew all too well that Iwagakure wouldn't let them slip away without a fight. A major engagement was on the cards, and bloodshed was unavoidable. Their only hope lay in buying time. If Yanyan village delayed its response, Nathan's group might widen the gap between pursuers and reduce the chance of ambushes along the way. Fewer clashes meant fewer casualties, but good intentions didn't guarantee good fortune. Just as they finally shook off the last of the Iwa scouts and prepared to clear the enemy's defensive perimeter, Hinata Aoyama came charging back with a look of terror on her face. Nathan braced himself. Whatever she had to report, it wasn't going to be good. Chapter X. The road ahead is blocked. Hinata Aoyama's eyes throbbed as the veins around his Byakugan bulged. Through the tangle of jungle and jagged rocks, he pinpointed the enemy ranks a few hundred meters out. Nathan and the other jonin had already formed a semicircle, waiting for his report. "How many of them? And what's their strength?" one of them called. Hinata let his gaze sweep over the scene. About 100 shinobi in total, fewer than 10 jonin, roughly 50 chunin, the Rei, Saint Wretched Genin. He paused, brow furrowing. Instinctively, he turned his head toward his 2 o'clock position, then snapped it toward 10 o'clock. "Hold on, 2 additional OVA squads are converging on us from those directions. Each is about the same size as the force blocking our path." Byakugan granted him a full 360-degree field of vision, so a head turn wasn't strictly necessary. Yet his habit of facing the direction he described had its benefits. Nathan and the others now knew precisely where to focus. Lieutenant Surabaya's eyes flicked to 2 o'clock, then 10. Nathan drew in a steadying breath. With 3 enemy contingents bearing down on them, every second counted. "All right," he said, stepping forward. "Form up and tighten our perimeter. We'll hit them with a pincer strike. Hinata, you cover our flanks. Surabaya, coordinate with the rest of the chunin. Let's move." Nathan quickly reviewed the surrounding terrain in his mind and pinpointed the only 2 routes that led out of the area. After a moment's calculation, he announced with grim certainty, "The Iwa shinobi have sealed off every other exit. Those 2 enemy teams must be converging on us now that they know which path we're taking." Before anyone could question him, he barked, "Sound the alert. Everybody, get ready. We'll punch through in one swift strike." A stunned silence fell over the squad for a heartbeat, then understanding spread through the ranks. If they didn't break the blockade now, before the Iwa completed their encirclement, they'd be trapped for good. There was no choice but to move immediately. At Nathan's command, the soldiers sprang into action. They fanned out to their positions, tightening straps, checking their gear, and settling into formation. Leading the charge, Nathan and the other jonin stepped to the front, spearheading the assault and bracing to meet the Iwa shinobi head-on. The squad shifted formation in a heartbeat, and before the Iwa ninjas posted at their 2 and 10 o'clock flanks could even react, Nathan's team was already advancing. The gap between friend and foe shrank by the second. 500 meters, 300 meters, 100 meters. Through the blur of motion, Nathan spotted over 100 rock ninjas perched in the trees lining the road. They crouched on thick branches, kunai at the ready, eyes locked on Nathan's approach with cold vigilance. He could feel their tension radiating down to him, and he knew his own squad's desperation was feeding it. 80 meters, 50 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters. Before Nathan could issue another command, a sharp voice cut through the air. Fire! In the next instant, a storm of kunai blasted toward them. Thanks to the Sharingan, Nathan tracked the faint glow of explosive tags attached to many of the blades. If even one detonated among his ranks, the raising force alone would shatter their formation, let alone wounded Shinobi. Nathan's shout rang out above the thunder of metal. Don't let them get close. Nathan's hands moved in a blur as he formed the final hand seals. He drew in a deep breath until his lungs felt ready to burst, then exhaled with a ferocious roar. Wind chakra surged outward, wrapping around the air before him and twisting into a churning vortex. In seconds, that vortex became a miniature hurricane, tearing across the battlefield. Kunai flew from outstretched hands, trees cracked and splintered, and even the rock ninjas who stood at the rear were knocked sprawling by the gale's sheer force. What kind of jutsu is this? One of them yelled, his voice barely audible above the roaring wind. All around, terrified cries echoed. They'd never encountered anything like it. Nathan's wind release, Great Breakthrough, was more than powerful. It was utterly devastating. Nathan finally released the last of his chakra and staggered back, gasping for air. Ha ha! The Konoha Jonin standing beside him, eyes wide with alarm, reached out. Nathan, are you all right? Nathan waved him off, forcing himself to steady his breathing. I'm fine. His chest heaved, but he masked the strain with a dismissive grin. He'd simply pushed too much chakra into the wind style, Great Breakthrough all at once, and for a moment, he'd nearly lost control. Still, that was precisely why the technique had broken through the enemy's defenses so spectacularly. Good to hear. The Jonin exhaled, visibly relieved as Nathan's breathing returned to normal. No sooner had the tension eased than a jagged stone spear, shaped like a twisted pillar, whistled through the clearing, aimed directly at Nathan's heart. Watch out, his companion shouted. Nathan's Sharingan flared to life. The red irises tracked the spear in a blur of motion. In a heartbeat, he slipped to the side, letting the rocky projectile slam into the ground where he just stood. Stone shards bounced off the earth as the spear embedded itself in the soil. Heart pounding, Nathan glanced back at the spear's tip quivering inches from his hip. His Sharingan faded and he glanced at the Jonin, voice steady once more. Thanks, let's keep moving. At that moment, a jagged spear of stone erupted at Nathan's feet, then another, then a third, and a fourth. Within the blink of an eye, dozens of earthen pillars rocketed toward him from the front, each one aiming to pin him in place. But Nathan was already gone. He weaved through the barrage with preternatural speed. As he cleared the last spear, his eyes locked onto the jutsu's caster. His hands traced the seals in a blur, and a translucent blade of wind coalesced in his palm. With a swift step forward, he slashed, releasing the blade in a razor-sharp arc. A muffled groan answered him. Through the Sharingan's crimson glow, Nathan saw a rock ninja clutching his bleeding arm, crouched and unsteady. Seizing the opening, Nathan produced several steel-hard shuriken and flung them at the wounded shinobi's throat, heart, and lower abdomen. The ninja twisted desperately, but one of the stars tore into his left flank, draining both his strength and his will to fight. It was the perfect demonstration of Nathan's deadly timing and unerring precision. Nathan's advance left the rock ninjas stunned, until, finally, they snapped out of their shock and unleashed a flurry of attacks. Shuriken and kunai arced through the air. One by one, they summoned elemental jutsu or launched themselves toward him in a deadly charge. Unfazed, Nathan drew the short sword at his hip and surged forward. At that instant, it was as if an invisible switch had flipped behind him. The Konoha ninjas waiting in his wake exploded into action, racing across the 20 meters that separated them from the enemy. In the blink of an eye, the two sides collided. The battlefield erupted in clamor. Metal rang against metal. Kunai ricocheted off rock walls, and explosive tags detonated amid the press of bodies. Nathan darted through the fray with lethal precision, sidestepping jutsu blasts and incoming weapons as though he could predict their every arc. Each time he closed in, he drove the short sword home, slashing or thrusting with a surgeon's accuracy. Ninjas fell to the ground, wounded or worse, before their comrades could even comprehend what was happening. It wasn't mere speed or power that gave Nathan the edge. It was the momentary paralysis he inspired in anyone who saw his blade drawn. As soon as an opponent locked eyes with that cold steel, they froze in place, helpless as lambs led to slaughter. In the half-second it took them to recover, Nathan was already gone, moving on to his next target. The carnage continued, ruthless and swift, while Nathan and the Konoha team pressed their assault without mercy. Nathan moved with uncanny precision, his blade a blur of motion as he tapped into the full might of his illusion sword technique. From the moment his Elusi on Sharingan flared to life, every twitch, every breath of the Iwagakure shinobi around him was laid bare. Without some rare defense against his instant genjutsu, they stood no chance, only a matter of seconds before the sword found its mark. He weaved through the hail of rock ninjutsu, eyes glowing red as he searched relentlessly for the smallest opening. In rapid succession, 7 mid-level Iwagakure ninja fell to a single, perfectly timed thrust. Each death was swift, each rival unaware of his fate until it was already sealed. Finally, a seasoned Iwagakure jonin surged forward, chakra flaring as he attempted to shield his comrades. But Nathan scarcely hesitated. With a flick of his wrist, he deflected the jonin's strikes and slipped past him, already advancing on a fresh cluster of enemy shinobi. The attacking jonin chased after him, only to be intercepted by a Konoha jonin who emerged from the fray. Nathan halted long enough to catch his ally's nod. In that brief exchange, the Konoha jonin took up the Iwagakure veteran's challenge, clashing blades in a fierce dance of chakra and steel. With his comrade engaged, Nathan's gaze narrowed, the world blurring at the edges as he slipped back into his unparalleled killing mode. One by one, the unsuspecting rock ninjas fell, victims of an illusion they never even realized they were trapped in. Under ordinary circumstances, Nathan would never have ordered such a direct assault. But this situation was anything but ordinary. If they didn't smash through the Iwagakure blockade before enemy reinforcements arrived from the flanks, Konoha's entire team would be trapped and outnumbered. On a battlefield, hesitation is the quickest path to defeat. Nathan set aside every unwritten rule and focused on one clear objective: eliminate the Rock Village ninjas in front of them and clear the way for his comrades. Everything else would have to wait. Minute by minute, Konoha's squad advanced at a blistering pace. With Nathan leading the charge alongside several jonin from the combat unit, they crashed into the enemy lines, and in less than 3 minutes, the blockade lay in ruins. It sounded almost reckless, but the numbers spoke for themselves. Their jonin outmatched the rock shinobi one-on-one, and their overall strength far exceeded the enemy's. No force could hold back their surge. Because the enemy couldn't match their numbers, and with Nathan, the self-styled god of killing, leading the way, the Rock Ninja army had been unable to mount any effective defense. In no time at all, Nathan's large force had poured past their front lines. But passing through didn't mean they were in the clear. In fact, the real trial was only just beginning. As soon as the rear guard of rock ninjas saw the shinobi slip away, they surged forward with no hesitation. Now that the two armies were separated, there was no risk of friendly fire, and the rock ninjas unleashed everything they had. They rained down explosive jutsu and artillery barrage, forcing Konoha's troops to detach squads and chase them off. Every time a pair of rock ninja squads pressed the attack, Nathan's group was forced to slow its march and send reinforcements. That delay was precisely the enemy's intention. The rock ninja operatives drew on every last drop of chakra in their bodies, performing high-level techniques in rapid succession just to stall Nathan and his companions. And once they had weakened the pursuit, that would be the signal for reinforcements, friendly troops to arrive. In other words, when you speak of Cao Cao, Cao Cao appears. The moment these rock ninjas bought enough time, their supposed savior would step onto the field. Just over a minute later, the rock ninja squads closing in from 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock caught up to them. They'd missed the ideal moment and could no longer encircle Nathan and his team, but the sheer increase in enemy numbers was enough to rattle everyone. Still, Nathan refused to hesitate. He knew that if they stopped now, they'd be overwhelmed by wave after wave of attackers. Their only hope was a breakthrough and make it back to the stronghold at Fengliu town. Even if they suffered heavy losses along the way, pushing forward was their best and only chance. Chapter 213. The final obstacle. Night fell in the blink of an eye, and a sudden downpour turned the jungle into a tangle of dripping vines and slick undergrowth. Nathan and the others stumbled into the dense foliage, rain hammering their armor and robes. After hours of fierce fighting and desperate retreats, they were utterly spent, every muscle screaming for rest. "Aoyama!" Narashishui called out, turning to his companion. Hinata Aoyama nodded, steeling himself. He pressed a hand to his chest, closed his eyes, and then reopened them. Veins stood out at his temples as his vision expanded to cover every movement within a kilometer. After a long, tense moment, he relaxed and spoke in a calm, measured voice. No large enemy concentrations nearby, just scattered shinobi on patrol. "Good work," Narashishui sighed in relief. He looked over at Nathan. "Nathan, you'll take care of those lookouts. Qingshan, lend him a hand." "Understood," Hinata Qingshan replied. Nathan offered no response. He turned and slipped silently into the foliage, the weight of constant battles pressing on his mind and body. At that moment, he had nothing left to say. Narashishui watched Nathan slip away, then gave a curt nod to Hinata Qingshan to follow. Before long, the two of them had peeled off from the main group. Main group felt like a generous description. Over the past 24 hours, they'd scarcely paused, determined not to be trailed and encircled. Their relentless pace had certainly kept Iwagakure at bay, but it had come at a terrible cost. Any Konoha shinobi who'd lagged behind or become embroiled in a skirmish on the route had been overwhelmed by the enemy, captured, or killed outright. By now, their numbers had been whittled down to barely half of what they once were, hardly the formidable force they'd started with. 15 minutes later, Nathan returned from his reconnaissance run, expression still hollow with exhaustion. He gave Narashishui a brief nod, but said nothing. From a few paces back, Hyuga Aoyama exhaled the news they all needed. "Every surveillance post within a kilometer has been neutralized. We've bought ourselves at least 30 minutes of rest." Their reduced ranks brought an unexpected advantage. With fewer bodies to slow them down, their pace remained blistering. Even the bulked-up Iwagakure army couldn't hope to keep up. Early morning rain pelted the forest floor, washing away any trace of the missing surveillance post. With the listening station gone and the downpour obscuring their trail, Iwagakure's ninjas would have a much harder time picking up Nathan and his team, so long as they didn't pause too long. They dared not linger, knowing that any delay would give the enemy scouts time to report their position. With a nod, Nathan signaled the others, and the Leaf Shinobi pressed on through the storm. They hadn't gone far before Iwa reconnaissance squads came trooping in. The first team of 100 shinobi fanned out, examining broken branches and mud tracks. Once they'd pieced together the direction of the escape, they radioed back for reinforcements. One by one, more detachments arrived, until over 700 Iwagakure ninja were in hot pursuit. But Nathan's group was far from helpless. Each time the scouts closed in, the Leaf Shinobi thwarted them with clever feints, hidden traps, and desperate skirmishes. Dozens of Iwa pursuers fell to shuriken volleys or a well-placed clay bomb. When the enemy scouts finally appeared in force, Nathan and his comrades slipped through gaps in the lines, disappearing into side trails and underbrush. It became a deadly game of cat and mouse, two sides matching wits, chasing and evading under the relentless rain. By dawn, the storm had spent itself, and both pursuers and pursued emerged waterlogged and weary. The forest lay quiet, save for the distant calls of birds greeting the morning. Nathan paused on a ridge, peering down at the winding path below. The night had passed in a blur of mud, blood, and strategic gambits, but the mission was far from over. As the first light brought through the clouds, he drew a steadying breath and signaled his team onward. Early morning had arrived, and with it, the next leg of their escape. Nathan and the others came to an abrupt halt when over 100 rock ninja appeared, blocking the road ahead. Their faces went pale. They just managed to throw off their pursuers and were closing in on the protective perimeter of Fengliu Town's stronghold, only to find this new force standing in their way. No one felt relieved. If it had been a standard squad of 100, Nathan's team, though similarly reduced in numbers, would have been confident of victory. But these rock ninja were different. Hardly any of them were genin, and the raw intensity of their chakra far outmatched that of an ordinary unit. It was clear this was an elite detachment. At the forefront stood Jonin Shu, the very rock ninja who had clashed with Nathan not long ago. Nathan's heart sank. Today's mission had just become infinitely more dangerous. If Sho chose to outflank them, instead of charging head-on, Nathan knew his team would suffer heavy losses before the fight was over. There was no doubt, unless they found a clever counter, this confrontation would be their toughest yet. Nathan had always been wary of Sho, but he didn't know that Shu feared him just as much. After watching Nathan in yesterday's skirmish, Sho couldn't shake the memory of his opponent's prowess. Nathan had personally accounted for nearly a quarter of the Stone Ninja casualties, and yet he'd shown no sign of fatigue. That alone was enough to unnerve Sho. Determined not to underestimate Nathan a second time, Shu handpicked an elite squadron to block Nathan and his companions. Now, under a steady downpour, the two forces stood facing each other across the slick, rain-drenched field. No one knew who shouted the order, "Kill!" But at that cry, the clash erupted. Both sides hurled kunai in unison, the sharp blades whistling through the air. Yet each was expertly thrown, and none found a mark. It was a mere formality, a prelude to the real fight. "Kill!" The command rang out again, and steel met steel as the warriors rushed forward. Nathan drew his short sword with deadly precision. In the span of a heartbeat, two elite shinobi crumpled to the ground. Across the field, Sho met him blow for blow, proving himself every bit as formidable. The rain soaked their uniforms and turned the earth to mud, but neither man showed mercy. The battle had truly begun. Nathan's two crushing blows punched gaping holes through the torsos of two Konoha Chunin, ending them instantly. He didn't hesitate to let the carnage continue. Holding back would only let his enemies fight with even more reckless abandon. Only by matching their brutality could he force them to focus solely on him. His gamble paid off. In rapid succession, he dispatched 6 Iwagakure Chunin. At that point, Sho could no longer hold back. With a furious roar, he charged straight at Nathan. This time, Nathan didn't sidestep. He planted his feet and waited. When Sho closed the distance, their clash was instantaneous. Nathan's blade flashed with deadly precision, each slash so swift that Sho had to flinch away at the last possible moment. In turn, Sho's fists crackled with explosive chakra, forcing Nathan to remain perpetually on guard. To any onlooker, it looked like a carefully rehearsed dance. Strikes and counters so perfectly timed that neither fighter ever landed a solid hit. But behind those feints and withdrawals lay two warriors locked in ruthless focus, each probing for the slightest weakness. Nathan knew why neither he nor Sho had risked landing a solid blow on the other. Once flesh met fist or steel met body, someone would get seriously hurt. Neither of them would allow that without absolute certainty of victory. As the minutes ticked by, the tension on the battlefield kept rising. Nathan's eyes flicked to the distant ranks of rock ninja forces. If he didn't act soon, they'd be completely surrounded. Recalling how he and his team had narrowly escaped in their last skirmish, Nathan decided it was time to break off the duel. He sidestepped Sho's incoming strike with fluid grace, putting a solid step between them. Then, without a moment's hesitation, he snapped his fingers together and wove his hands into the swift seals of the fire-style jutsu. "Great fireball technique," he shouted. A roaring sphere of flame erupted from Nathan's palms and shot straight toward Sho. The earlier confrontations had already cleared a wide perimeter around them, so Nathan had no fear of harming his own people. The blazing orb hurtled forward, its incandescent heat painting the air orange as Nathan prepared to use its shock to cover their retreat and keep the rock ninja at bay. Nathan grimaced as he felt the rain dampen the power of his fire-release jutsu, forcing him to burn extra chakra just to maintain its strength. Luckily, his reserves were more than sufficient, so draining a little extra chakra was the least of his concerns. Nathan felt the searing heat of a fireball bearing down on him. Without hesitation, he vaulted to the side, mud spraying beneath his feet. Before he could land properly, however, A faint whine of metal slicing through the air told him trouble was far from over. Though the rain masked most sounds, Hunter, standing a few paces behind, picked up the threat instantly. He pivoted at the last possible moment, narrowly evading a volley of kunai that hissed as they buried themselves in the wet earth. Nathan muttered, eyes narrowing at the sound of that familiar voice. He flicked a glance forward and spotted a kunai pulsing with crimson light, the explosive talisman affixed to its shaft, burning fiercely. Instinctively, Nathan drove off the ground with both feet and rocketed forward like a human cannonball. Boom! The talisman erupted in a ferocious blast, a globe of fire expanding outward in an instant. The shockwave caught Nathan squarely, hurling him backward through the air. He crashed to the ground and coughed twice, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth, a clear sign the explosion had taken its toll. No sooner had he braced himself than a fresh volley of kunai arced through the rain, their razor-sharp tips aimed straight at him. "Come again?" Hunting's voice cut through the air like a blade. Kari snorted in response. His fingers wove a rapid series of seals before he slammed his palm into the earth. With a thunderous crack, a 2-meter square stone slab burst up between them. The kunai embedded in its face rang out with a sharp clang, and even the detonating talismans affixed to the blades detonated harmlessly, their blasts absorbed by the barrier Kari had summoned. Seizing the moment, Genjin didn't hesitate. He formed another set of intricate hand signs, inhaled deeply, and unleashed a volley of glowing orbs. Phoenix-bright fireballs erupted from his mouth in a roaring cascade, the fire-release Phoenix Immortal Flame technique. At Nathan's precise chakra control, the inferno split into 2 arcs that swept around Hunting's flanks, hemming him in from left and right. Hunting's eyes flicked to the encroaching flames. With a swift hop backward, he narrowly evaded the searing spheres, but he refused to stay on the defensive. Mid-retreat, he wove yet another series of seals. The instant his feet hit the ground, he drove his fist into the earth and invoked his own ninjutsu, Earth Release, Quagmire Technique. Instantly, the ground at his strike point liquefied into a mire of sticky mud, sending tremors of upheaval toward his attackers. Nathan barely escaped disaster. The rain-soaked earth beneath his feet turned into treacherous mud, like a yawning abyss ready to swallow him whole. Instinctively, he infused chakra into the soles of his boots and leapt onto the nearest tree. As the ground collapsed behind him, he sprang again, landing on a second trunk just before the first was swallowed by the quagmire. But his retreat only played into his opponent's hands. Before Nathan could steady himself, Kari's kunai hissed through the air, aiming straight for his vital points. In that split second, his Sharingan flared to life, mapping each blade's trajectory with uncanny precision. He twisted his body in midair, evading every knife edge by mere inches. For a heartbeat, the battlefield fell eerily silent. Nathan perched high among the branches while Hao watched him from the sodden ground below. 20 meters of rain-driven tension stretched between them. Each droplet pattered like a ticking clock. At last, the rain shifted into a furious downpour, a shimmering veil that blurred Nathan's vision. Now was his chance. Kari's pulse spiked. In a flash, he sprang from tree to tree like a lithe monkey, closing the 20-meter gap to Nathan before he even realized what was happening. With explosive speed, Kari burst through the canopy and launched a crushing right hook. Nathan rolled aside at the last instant. Kari's fist smashed into the thick trunk behind him with a deafening crack, sending splinters flying. A shard nicked Nathan's cheek, stinging with fresh pain. Kari didn't hesitate. He pivoted on his heel and swung a chakra-charged left fist straight for Nathan's midsection. The air around the blow hummed with power. Nathan skidded backward, planting a foot on a low branch to spring clear of the strike. He hit the forest floor on one knee, muscles coiled for defense, but Kari was already surging forward, eager to press his advantage. Nathan's eyes narrowed. Before Kari could reach him, he brought his hands together in a rapid series of seals. Red chakra flared at his fingertips as he completed the hand signs for fire release, dragon fire technique. The very air around him heated, and a crackling aura gathered between his palms. Now it was Nathan's turn to seize the initiative. The forest fell silent for a heartbeat. Then he unleashed his fiery counterattack. Sho didn't give him a moment's rest. The moment Karian landed, he lunged forward, flaring his nostrils, and then spewed a jagged stream of dragonfire straight at him. "No!" Karian shouted, slamming his palms together in a swift hand seal. In an instant, he activated his substitute technique. He vanished in a swirl of dust, and in his place lay a jagged stone. The fire blast thundered into the rock, shattering it to shards that clattered across the clearing. Seizing the split-second advantage, Karian dove behind a massive oak, gasping for breath. "That was too close," he panted, pressing one hand to his side. But before he could steady himself, a nearly meter-long blade of transparent wind sliced clean through the trunk and pierced him in the chest. Hot pain flared instantly. Blood spurted in a thick arc, turning the grass beneath him crimson. Only then did he register the agony. Karian looked down to see a long, brilliant slash across his armor and flesh. Across the glade, Nathan watched with satisfaction. He let his arms fall to his sides and released a quiet breath. Karian's substitute technique been executed flawlessly, but not flawlessly enough. Nathan's eyes had tracked each micro-movement, and he had timed his windblade attack to strike the instant the barrier fell away. Karian slumped against the tree, chest heaving, as the two brothers stood triumphant at the edge of the clearing. The battle had only just begun, but Nathan already knew who would win. Seizing the moment, Nathan finished the hand seal and, in a heartbeat of stillness, unleashed wind release, windblade. The trunk's thickness blunted the attack. It wasn't enough to slice the tree in two, but it nearly exhausted his chakra. Nathan surged forward, only to see Sho, the rock ninja, form a desperate seal. With his last reserves, Sho activated Earth Style, Earth Dragon Concealment, and vanished. In a swirl of raindrops, Nathan rematerialized behind the felled tree, but found himself alone. Frustration flared. This was the second time Sho had slipped through his fingers with the same kite tactic. The first escape had been a near miss. This time, despite taking a heavy blow from Nathan's blade, Sho had still evaded capture. Nathan clenched his teeth. "There won't be a third chance," he vowed under his breath. He drew his dagger, rain pounding the forest canopy above them and soaking the earth at his feet. Steeling himself, he scanned the shadows and advanced. The fight resumed in earnest, raindrops scattering as Shu's rock-hard techniques met Nathan's wind-wreathed strikes in a deadly dance. This time, the rock ninja's strength was undeniable, but so was Nathan's determination. Nathan's arrival on the battlefield changed everything. The Shinobi of Konoha had struggled again and again to break free from his devastating holds, but each attempt only tightened their bonds. Until now, no one had been able to stand against him, except for a lone rock village hunter whose methods were awkwardly checked by Nathan's unorthodox fighting style. Even the seasoned jonin of Iwagakure were powerless to subdue him unless they coordinated their efforts, an opportunity that never came. Nathan pressed the attack relentlessly. Within minutes, the lower-ranking rock ninjas lay broken and scattered, their defenses shattered. Deprived of those frontline buffers, the jonin hesitated to engage too deeply, wary of Nathan's lethal precision. Taking advantage of their fear, Nathan and his allies tore through the final lines of resistance and surged into the outer perimeter of the Fengliu town stronghold's radiation zone. The path ahead remained fraught with danger, yet it offered fewer threats than the gauntlet they had just run. Only one question weighed on their minds. After a full day of frantic signaling, none of their distress flares or messenger silk threads had drawn a reply. As they halted just beyond the stronghold's lethal glow, Nathan scanned the horizon, his heart pounding, not from exhaustion, but from the growing certainty that something more ominous awaited within. As soon as Nathan and his companions ran into that first wave of enemies, they sent an urgent plea to Fengliu town for reinforcements. But still, hours later, no answer had come. The silence gnawed at them, leaving Nathan and the others with a sinking feeling in their guts. Another day had slipped away, and there was still no help in sight. Chapter 215, Arrival and Decision. Nathan's heart pounded as he and his team cut down the last contingent of rock ninjas. Their arms trembled with fatigue, but they pressed on for another 2 hours, finally cresting the ridge that overlooked Fengliu town's battered stronghold. What they saw below stole the last of their strength. The outer walls, once sturdy and proud, were scarred by continuous attacks. Defenders manned the battlements with weary eyes, their banners torn. Not a single reinforcement had come. They weren't neglectful or cowardly, Nathan realized, but simply unable to spare another warrior. 2 rock ninja battalions lay just beyond the town's immediate defenses, their forces bolstered by the feared Four-Tails Jinchuriki, Lao Zi, and the Five-Tails Jinchuriki Han. Between those 2 formidable hosts, the stronghold was pinned down on every side. From the ramparts, they could see messengers darting off toward neighboring strongholds and the rear base camp, beseeching aid that might never arrive in time. No wonder we never saw Lao Zi or Han among the siege forces, Nathan murmured, the truth landing like a blow. They've been here all along. Lu Fen, standing at his side, brushed a lock of hair from her face and surveyed the scene below. That explains the ironclad perimeter we fought our way through, she said. If those 2 Jinchuriki are holding the flanks, this place is locked down tighter than we thought. Nathan let the realization settle in. With the defenders stretched to the breaking point and enemy reinforcements looming, time was running out. He looked at his exhausted team, then back toward the town gate. We can't wait for help to arrive, he declared. We need to act now, either reinforce the walls directly or strike at the heart of their deployment before Lao Zi and Han can press their advantage. Lu Fen met his gaze, determination bright in her eyes. Whatever it takes, Nathan, let's give them a fighting chance. As they steeled themselves for the decision ahead, the canyon air thrummed with distant battle cries. The moment of truth had come. Fangliu Town's fate would hinge on the choice Nathan and his comrades were about to make. Earlier, when Nathan and his companions learned that several nearby strongholds had been overrun, first by the elusive Four-Tails Jinchuriki and then by Han, the Five-Tails, they feared those 2 might soon turn their sights on them. Although the Four-Tails' identity remained a mystery, they knew from Han's rampage just how devastating a tailed beast host could be. If both of them joined the hunt, escape would be all but impossible. So they pressed on in tense silence, relieved when they encountered no sign of either Jinchuriki. At first, they convinced themselves they'd simply gotten lucky, but the truth soon became clear. Fangliu Town's stronghold had drawn every red-hot rock army scout in the region, and even the main force of the Hidden Rock Village. That fierce concentration of enemy attention was exactly the opening Nathan's band needed to slip away unnoticed. Yet when Nara Shisui and the others tallied the numbers, marching on Fangliu Town, their relief curdled into dread. With the full might of the Hidden Rock Village arrayed against them, they realized that, even with chakra wings, they'd struggle to break through such a blockade. If the pursuit turned their way, there might be no runway left for flight. Nathan studied the ragged handful of survivors around him. Even if they managed to flee now, the chances of everyone making it out alive were slim. Yet a few living souls were better than none at all. Captain Omura Wyron, commander of Fangliu Town, addressed the weary group with palpable gravity. "You'll have 1 day to rest," he announced. "After that, you'll join the town's defense squad and obey my orders without question. Understood?" No one dared refuse. But Nathan, ever vigilant, raised one final query. "Captain Weirin, how long before Yanyan Village is ready to strike?" Weirin spared him a steady glance. "Our scouts report that it'll take the Strug about a week to launch an attack." Nathan's brow furrowed. 1 week. He fell silent, nodding once to indicate he understood. The commander, satisfied with the answer, turned away to answer other men's questions. Nathan drifted to the edge of the circle, listening intently as he weighed the implications in his mind. A week. That was all the time they had to prepare, for both defense and whatever plan Nathan was already forming in his thoughts. Nathan stuck to his original plan. He would pause training in every other skill and funnel every ounce of daily chakra into mastering the Palm Immortal technique. He knew it would take about 10 days of relentless effort before the incremental gains finally triggered a true breakthrough, one that would transform his body and elevate his physique attribute. But with war looming in just a week, he worried that any delay would squander his time. Still, diverting chakra to other skills felt wrong. Strengthening his physique wasn't just a short-term advantage, it was the foundation he needed to unlock the Mangekyo Sharingan later on. Nathan refused to let a tight schedule derail his long-term goals. He paced the training hall, torn between urgency and patience, until Omura Yuito's next words set his pulse racing. Over the coming days, the Rock Ninja will almost certainly dispatch scouting parties to test our defenses. You've faced them before, Nathan. You know their tactics better than anyone. I want you to take point and hit them hard. Nathan's hesitation vanished. Rock Ninja Scouts? This was exactly the opportunity he needed. A real-world trial by fire that would force him to push his new technique and his body to the limit. A slow smile spread across his face. Understood, he said, his resolve solidified. 10 days or 10 seconds, he'd prove himself ready for anything the enemy threw at him. Nathan had no intention of returning to his old tactic of capturing rock ninjas as chakra batteries. He was still too unfamiliar with this terrain to risk such a blunt approach. Instead, he resolved to siphon chakra directly from the Evagakure shinobi he encountered on his mission. That way, he could not only close the gap in his own reserves, but also speed up his bodily enhancements, boosting his physique attribute within 7 days. The catch? He needed to harvest at least 17,000 chakra points every single day to meet his deadline. Even if he ruthlessly drained a chunin to the point of death, he'd only net about 7,000 points, so he'd have to target and fully exhaust 3 chunin-level ninjas each day, accounting for energy lost in the transfer. On paper, dispatching 3 opponents daily didn't sound impossible, but he'd have to schedule his training and missions with military precision. One mistimed encounter, one slip-up in his regimen, and the entire plan would collapse. Nathan quietly resolved his decision as Omura Weirin finished answering questions and laid out their next assignments, then finally dismissed everyone to rest. Fengliu Town's makeshift fortress had once been a small settlement of tightly packed homes. Though recent battles had wrecked many buildings, enough remained intact to shelter the troops. Nathan was assigned a modest room in one of the sturdier houses. Stepping inside, he didn't flop onto the cot. Instead, he washed his face, letting the cool water chase away the day's grime and fatigue. He still had ample chakra reserves, and he refused to squander them. Settling onto the floor, he adopted the hand seal for the palm immortal technique. First, he drew upon his yang escape chakra. As the energy coalesced, a gentle warmth coursed through his meridians, saturating every organ and bolstering each cell with renewed strength. 3 minutes later, the yang escape chakra depleted and its fortifying glow ebbed away. Undeterred, Nathan shifted his formation and prepared to cycle the technique once more. Nathan kept a relentless pace, cycling through the palm immortal technique every 3 minutes. With each strike, he unleashed the condensed yang escape chakra, subtly accelerating his body's evolution. As the sun dipped below the horizon, every drop of chakra he could muster had been spent. Fatigue weighed on him like a leaden cloak, but he refused to collapse in the training hall. Instead, Nathan rose on unsteady legs and made his way to the mess area, where he ate heartily. He knew that without a solid meal, his body wouldn't regenerate chakra properly, and pushing on an empty stomach invited serious injury. After filling his stomach, he finally allowed himself to sleep. Only with both rest and nutrition could he hope to recover the energy needed for tomorrow's trials. Chapter 216, Evolution and the Ghost Corpse Clan. A day later, the rest period was over. Nathan assembled his squad to begin the field assignments Omura Yuito had laid out. Fengliu Town sat at the foot of the mountain. Its western and northern edges lay less than 200 meters from the steep slopes, terrain that formed a vital strategic highland. To the south stretched the plains leading back to the rear base, while a sizable force of rock ninjas held position to the east. From these dispositions, 3 key missions emerged. 1. Link up with the support troops advancing from the south. 2. Keep constant surveillance on the eastern rock ninja contingent, so any offensive would be reported at once. 3. Patrol the mountain approaches to the west and north, engaging the smaller rock ninja detachments there and denying them any foothold on those high ridges. Knowing how crucial a steady supply of chakra was for their operations, Nathan didn't hesitate. He requested the 3rd assignment. Omura Yuito offered no objections and approved his plan immediately, placing the mountain passes squarely in Nathan's hands. It wasn't that Nathan was particularly friendly. Over the past day, the garrison commander had quietly pieced together what he could about Nathan and his companions. Once he learned that Nathan's combat prowess far outstripped even a veteran Jonin's, he realized their narrow escape to this point owed everything to Nathan's strength. So when Nathan formally asked to join the Western Mountain Stronghold's garrison, the commander didn't hesitate for a second. No sooner had Nathan signed on than he got exactly the sort of test he'd been hoping for. A small infiltration team of Iwanin probing the stronghold's defenses. The clash was over almost before it began. With sheer force of will and mastery of his techniques, Nathan cut through the rock ninja like a tempest. There was simply no counter for him. Once the last of his opponents fell, Nathan used his chakra absorption method to harvest every drop of their energy. Now flush with fresh chakra reserves, Nathan set to work without a moment's delay. Every spare second, and most of the occupied ones, was devoted to channeling yang-infused chakra through his body, fortifying muscle, bone, and spirit. He focused on perfecting the palm spirit technique, a style that, fortunately, demanded no tranquil chamber or formal dojo. He practiced it even in the corridors and watchtowers, a solitary silhouette moving through the garrison's ranks. To anyone watching, it might have looked odd. To Nathan, consistency was everything. Nathan knew that once the war ended, only a handful of shinobi would still be standing. His strange habits would never have the chance to spread, and even if rumors did leak out, who would notice? The ways of the ninja were secret by nature. No one bothered to investigate a technique they couldn't understand. Besides, the moment he awakened his Manjikyo Sharingan, his power would soar to Kage level. At that point, who would care about trivial details? In the ninja world, strength was everything. With this in mind, Nathan trained his body in broad daylight, mastering the Palm Immortal technique alongside his teammates. He only slipped into hiding when practicing chakra absorption. After all, chakra is a ninja's lifeblood. If anyone learned he could forcibly draw it out with such efficiency, they would grow silent and suspicious. Nathan had no desire to breed distrust, so he kept that ability to himself. Nathan's chakra absorption technique had already advanced to level 5, allowing him to siphon 1,000 chakra points from a target every second. A single Chunin's chakra could be fully drained in 7 or 8 seconds, fast enough that no one would suspect a thing. With this edge, Nathan cleared one hurdle after another and slid seamlessly into the next phase of his plan, intensive physical conditioning. 7 days later, the afternoon sun hung low in the sky as Nathan settled into his usual training spot. Today, he would again attempt the Palm Immortal Te, Shnik. He took a steadying breath, activated his Yang Escape chakra, and let it flow through every fiber of his being. At first, the sensation was subtle, as if a gentle current were winding its way through his limbs. Then, without warning, the chakra surged like a long-dormant volcano finally erupting, flooding his muscles with raw power. His strength and speed spiked in an instant, amplifying his body beyond its previous limits. Nathan's eyes shot open in surprise. He had pushed the technique further than ever before, and the results were both exhilarating and terrifying. With a sharp exhalation, he snapped out of the stance and released the gathered energy. A faint ripple danced across the ground where he'd been standing. From the edge of the training field, a small group of Konoha Chunin who'd been watching Nathan's progress exchanged worried glances. The sudden release of chakra was no ordinary training mishap. It was something far more dangerous. They hurriedly sounded the alarm. After a moment of tense silence, one of the shinobi finally spoke. "Captain, what's happening?" Nathan clenched his teeth against the sudden surge of discomfort, then forced a calm expression. He lifted a hand in a steadying gesture. "Hold your positions. Stay alert." Without waiting for more questions, he moved to the massive boulder beside him, settled into a cross-legged posture, and closed his eyes. Immediately, the jungle's noises and the watchful eyes of his Konoha Chunin drifted into the distance. All his attention turned inward to the raw energy convulsing through his veins. He hadn't expected this evolution to be so violent. The chakra ripped at the boundaries of his body, demanding space. Gripping the rocky ground beneath him, Nathan centered his mind and began to coax the power into orderly flow. Bit by bit, the turbulence eased and a familiar warmth, The same comfort he'd felt during his previous transformation washed over him. Minutes ticked by, then stretched into an hour. Outside, his subordinates shifted uneasily, exchanging worried glances. At last, Nathan opened his eyes. They shone with renewed strength and calm resolve. "All clear," he said quietly. Rising to his feet, he turned to face his team. "Let's move out." "Captain," one of the junior chunin called out, voice tight with uncertainty. A dozen more opened their mouths to speak, but Nathan simply raised a hand, silencing them instantly. His dark eyes locked onto a particular stretch of undergrowth. Calmly, he said, "You're here. Why not step into the light?" His words hung in the damp forest air. The junior chunin snapped into action, drawing kunai, scanning every shadow, every rustle of leaves. But there was nothing. No movement, no breath, no sign of an intruder. Whispers of doubt rippled through the group. Had Nathan misread the situation? Before they could voice their concerns, slow, mocking applause echoed from the trees. "Pa! Pa!" A chill ran down their spines. Then came a low, rasping laugh and the soft crunch of footsteps on dead leaves. "Ha! Ghost sword, Nathan. Your senses really are as sharp as they say," the disembodied voice taunted. From the gloom, a figure emerged. His clothes hung in tattered shreds, and his face was drawn tight over sunken bone, skin shriveled as though he'd been dead for days. Yet he smiled, an unnatural, eerie grin that froze the blood in their veins. It was a corpse, and it was coming for them. Nathan and his chunin stood in uneasy silence as the ragged group approached. Not a flicker of life stirred in the newcomer's eyes or movements, a fact that lulled the chunin into complacency until Nathan detected the faintest tremor of chakra. He narrowed his eyes, stepping forward. "Who are you?" he demanded, "and why have you come for me?" The strangers bore no insignia, no vine leaf of Konohagakure, no rock emblem of Iwagakure, nor any other village mark. They belonged to no known shinobi faction. Nathan's mind raced. Their mannerisms, their aura, they matched nothing he'd seen among the 5 great shinobi Nate-ons. A rough suspicion took root even as he weighed his options. Before he could question further, the foremost figure, a stooped man with skin like cracked parchment, let out a brittle chuckle. "Hey, who are we?" the man croaked, pausing with a mischievous grin. Then, as if cued, his companions joined in perfectly synchronized unison. "Ha ha! It hardly matters. We are the Great Ghost Corpse Clan. Ha!" Their laughter burst across the clearing, a chorus of eerie mirth that clung to the air and sent a chill through Nathan's spine. The battlefield fell under a shroud of silent dread as the Ghost Corpse's proclamation echoed on. Nathan's eyes snapped open, as if he'd just seen through a trick. "Heads up! Cover your ears! It's an illusion!" "What?" The handful of Konoha chunin glanced at one another, confusion flickering across their faces. Then they noticed something even more alarming. Each of them had been smiling without realizing it. Alarmed, they immediately clapped their hands over their ears, bracing for whatever invisible threat was coming. Chapter 217, Bounty Ninja. The instant Nathan saw through the shadowy trick before him, Ghost let the illusion collapse, no further chakra expended, no more fanfare. The spectators' laughter died away. A handful of Konoha chunin lowered their weapons, though their faces still betrayed a flicker of unease. Nathan, however, remained composed. He didn't move to strike. Instead, he locked eyes with Ghost and asked, "Why are you after me?" Ghost shrugged and flashed a grin. "Why? For the reward, of course." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "A reward? Someone put your head on the black market," Ghost explained coolly. "I'm just the first to answer the call." "A black market bounty?" Nathan murmured. He'd already suspected this. Ghost wore no village crest and bore none of the sleek uniform of Ambu operators. The riddle of who would issue such a contract also had an obvious answer. The stubborn old Tsuchikage, Onoki. No one else relished outsourcing Konoha's dirty work quite like him. Nathan's lips curved in a wry half-smile. "A bounty ninja, then? Let me guess. Onoki?" Ghost's grin widened. "You catch on fast. But care to tell me what you'll pay for your own head?" A tense hush settled over the clearing as the two adversaries sized each other up, each measuring the stakes of a hunt that had only just begun. Nathan's mind raced as he pieced it together. Someone had hired a bounty ninja to take him out. The final clue lay in the location. This hideout was deep in the heart of the battlefield, screened by layer upon layer of defenses. No way could an outsider have slipped in without secret backing from either Konoha or Iwagakure. Konoha? Ridiculous. Even Danzo wouldn't dare mount an attack like this under these conditions. He'd be burning whatever influence he had left. So that only left one option, Iwagakure. Ghost Clan? Nathan murmured, frowning. He'd heard of every major bloodline in both his past life and this one, but the Ghost Clan was new to him. The name suggested some long-lost lineage of the undead, yet there was no record he could find. If they weren't just a minor family inflating their reputation, then they must have been wiped out during the Great Ninja War, erased from all official scrolls afterward. Either way, Nathan knew one thing for certain. However the Ghost Clan factored into this ambush, it was going to take everything he had to unravel their scheme. Nathan paused, considering a third possibility. Perhaps this so-called Ghost Corps clan didn't actually exist, that it was all a ruse concocted by his opponent. With that unsettling thought, he activated his Sharingan and trained its scarlet gaze on the hooded figure before him and the handful of warriors arrayed behind him. The ghostly leader's eyes flickered when he noticed Nathan's dojutsu. Guilt? Surprise? Nathan couldn't read the expression. Without hesitating, the figure barked an order. His followers surged forward in a blur, weapons raised. Nathan remained perfectly still, silently analyzing every movement. Beside him, his Konoha Chunin teammates reacted immediately, but they paid the price for their haste. The Ghost Corps fighters embraced the clash with reckless abandon and seemingly indifferent to wounds or death. True to their grim reputation, they pressed on as though life itself were meaningless. Caught off guard by such ferocity, the Konoha shinobi found themselves overwhelmed. In mere moments, they were driven back, their defenses shattered under relentless assault. Watching it unfold, Nathan realized that even without resorting to a suicidal, die-together tactic, these warriors were far stronger than the average Chunin. The Ghost Corps clan, fabricated or not, was a force to be reckoned with, and Nathan would need every ounce of skill and strategy to prevail. Even wounded, a handful of shinobi working together could pin down an average jonin. Nathan wondered if their target had another trick ready. Before he could answer his own question, a Konoha Chunin seized his moment. With a fierce lunge, he drove a kunai straight through the man's chin and into his brain. Pride flickered across the Chunin's face, until the victim cracked a twisted grin. In an instant, his body ballooned, black, jagged lines of a curse seal crawling up his arms and torso. Alarm flared in Nathan's chest. The Chunin stumbled backward, panic in his eyes, but the man was already moments from self-destructing. Nathan didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, grabbed the Chunin's arm, planted his feet, and shot them both back like a human cannonball. Boom! A muffled roar split the air. The cursed shinobi detonated from within, spraying dark blood, bone shards, and flesh fragments in a 10-meter radius. Nathan's ears rang, but he'd bought his comrade just enough time to escape the blast. When the dust finally settled, the clearing lay ravaged. Flowers and shrubs were shredded, tree trunks gouged, and even the earth pocked with craters, each one the result of bone fragments fired like shrapnel. Anyone caught in that blast would have been torn apart. Nathan released the Konoha Chunin he'd been holding and fixed the ghost before him with a guarded stare. A single hand had wrought all that destruction, enough proof that this enemy was outrageously dangerous. Around them, figures slipped from the tree line, surrounding their small band. A handful of Konoha Chunin dispatched their opponents with swift jutsu and fell back to Nathan's side. One of them bowed slightly and whispered, "Captain, what are your orders?" Nathan glanced at the ghost, then back at his men. "Your move," he said evenly. The ghost laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "My target is Uchiha Nathan. If you know what's good for you, get out of my way." The Konoha shinobi recognized the attempt to intimidate them and perhaps pit them against their captain, but despite their unease, they held their ground. Nathan's expression, however, remained calm and unreadable. Nathan studied the ghost and its irage, then spoke with quiet confidence. "They're not spirits at all, just people in disguise." The creature tilted its head, feigning innocence. "What are you talking about?" But Nathan had already seen the flicker of fear behind its eyes. He allowed himself a small, knowing smile, then motioned to his men. "Keep your distance and stay sharp." Before anyone could react, Nathan launched himself toward the nearest figure, 20 meters away, with the speed of a striking falcon. In midair, he activated his Sharingan illusion, warping the ghost's perception even at that range. Frozen by the spell, it never saw the blade coming. In one fluid motion, Nathan drew his sword and severed its head clean from its shoulders. The head flew off in a perfect arc, smashing against a gnarled tree trunk before tumbling 8 meters down the forest floor. Only when the severed head hit the ground did the illusion shatter. The creature's body stiffened, and its eyes, now free of cathing glamour, burned with pure rage and malice as they fixed on Nathan once more. Nathan's lips moved in ragged, unnatural gasps, hoarse breaths that sounded more like the wheezing of a dying old man than a warrior in his prime. His tormentor sneered. "So that's the ghost sword, Uchiha Nathan, you can't kill me." With a crackling roar, the enemy seized control of the corpse at Nathan's side and forced it to self-destruct, even more violently than the last damned corpse did. Boom! Blood and bone shards sprayed out in all directions. When the dust settled, Nathan was gone. A heartbeat later, a severed head shot through the air. Nathan reappeared 20 meters off, his blade arcing through the corpse's neck so cleanly the head only just had time to drop before he disappeared again. In a heartbeat span, he reemerged twice more, dispatching 2 more bodies with perfect, brutal precision. The spirit reacted with a furious howling, hurling every nearby corpse into the fray at once. Explosions ripped through the clearing in rapid succession, showering Nathan with bone fragments and debris, pinning him momentarily in a deadly crossfire. All around him, the reanimated dead hovered, in a silent circle, their hollow eye sockets fixed on him as their collective voice rose in a chilling chant. "Uchiha Nathan, why do you resist? We are eternal. Your sword cannot destroy us." Nathan steadied his breathing, every muscle poised for what came next. "Give up." The voices of the so-called ghost corpses slithered through Nathan's ears like devilish whispers, each word a calculated assault on his will. They urged, they taunted, they tried every trick to break him. But Nathan remained unmoved. Without uttering a single word, he continued his careful, methodical sweep, clearing the field of those accursed remains with unwavering focus. Chapter 218, Speculation and Improvement. Time seemed to stretch as Nathan fought on. With every swing of his short sword, another undead corpse collapsed, its head severed from a single fluid stroke. All around him, the field of battle was clearing at a rate almost visible to the naked eye. These ghost corpses were unlike any mindless zombies he'd encountered before. In close combat, they moved with surprising agility, executing rudimentary ninjutsu and coordinating attacks in small groups. More disturbingly, they could expel a sickly greenish mist that spread like a living fog. Nathan had at first assumed it was a toxic gas, but observation proved otherwise. The miasma behaved like a colony of bacteria. When it touched living flesh, it multiplied rapidly, infecting the host's tissues and slowing their movements until they too became a reanimated corpse. Nathan remained untroubled. As soon as the mist drifted near, he unleashed his trademark wind style, Great Breakthrough. A roaring gust sent the putrid vapor scattering back into the ranks of his foes. With the air cleared, he waded in, cleaving one corpse after another in a merciless purge. Wave after wave rose to challenge him, but Nathan noticed a troubling pattern. Each successive group seemed more decrepit than the last. Their flesh was drier, their limbs more rigid, their coordination increasingly erratic. The once sharp edges of their ninjutsu tricks had dulled, and their smoke-like mist thinned into mere puffs of noxious air. Pausing to catch his breath, Nathan wiped his blade clean on the grass. He surveyed the battlefield, rows of broken bodies, the lingering cloud of green haze dissipating in his wake. Why were these undead deteriorating? All had been summoned by the same dark ritual, yet their strength was plainly waning. Nathan pressed his fingertips to his temple, piecing the clues together. Perhaps the necromantic spell sustaining them was flawed or decaying. Or maybe a deeper counterforce, some hidden resistance in the living world, was at work. Whatever the cause, the weakening of the enemy offered a rare advantage. His eyes narrowed. With renewed resolve, Nathan sheathed his sword and moved forward, determined not just to survive the night, but to unravel the secret behind these failing abominations. Generally, a sensible person would fall back once the odds turned against them, regroup, and then return when the situation looked more favorable. But this ghost knew nothing of prudence. The more of its decomposing bodies Nathan destroyed, the more unhinged it became. Its emotions twisted into bestial rage, and in the end it outright lost its sanity. All it could think to do was attack. Nathan registered the shift with a flicker of surprise, but he didn't pause to analyze it. Right now, all he cared about was ending this fight, and then figuring out what effect his mysterious transformation was having on him. 15 minutes later, after Nathan severed yet another ghastly head, only 3 of the ghost corpses remained. They hadn't retreated for a moment. Instead, they howled and charged him without a second's hesitation. Nathan didn't bother with any formalities. In a blur of motion, he sprang forward. His blade sliced through the air with 2 sharp swish sounds, and 2 more heads rolled across the floor. Only one spectral corpse stood before him now, and Nathan readied himself for the final strike. Nathan tensed, bracing for another strike, but the onslaught never came. In an instant, the frenzied rage in his opponent's eyes drained away, replaced by an eerie calm so sudden it made Nathan's skin crawl. He exhaled softly and held his ground. The ghostly warrior before him glanced over the carnage of shattered specters lining the field. No hint of shock crossed its pale features as it surveyed the slain, only a slow, deliberate turn to Nathan, unharmed and resolute. For a flicker of a heartbeat, fear glimmered in the ghost's hollow gaze. "Nathan, you're formidable," it rasped, each word scraping like dry bones across Nathan's ears. "Truly formidable." Nathan said nothing, keeping his sword leveled at its chest. A cold smile curled the ghost's lips, and it laughed, a hollow, rattling sound that echoed through the ruined courtyard. "Ha!" It seemed to relish the moment. Then, as abruptly as the laughter came, its expression twisted back into madness. "But you can't kill me," the ghost bellowed, voice cracking with manic resolve. "I am eternal." With that, it pressed a hand against its chest and exploded in a blinding flash of spectral energy. Nathan barely had time to register the roar before a shockwave ripped outward, tearing at the dust and debris around him. He tightened his grip, steeling himself against the blast. As the light dimmed and the echoes faded, only the wounded courtyard remained, and Nathan, standing alone, still unbroken. Nathan barely had time to react before a thick, dark green mist swirled into view, spreading rapidly across the clearing and driving him back several paces. He froze, and just as suddenly as it had appeared, the mist dissipated, vanishing into the earth as though it had been absorbed by the ground itself. Heart pounding, Nathan knelt and pressed a gloved finger to the soil. His eyes shot to the nearby body of a Konoha-chunin, the same man who'd stumbled into Nathan's path moments ago. The chunin lay on his back, his flesh shriveled and gray as if he'd become a walking corpse. Nathan remembered hesitating before. He hadn't been sure if the man was alive when the strange spirit exploded. Now there was no doubt he was dead. Dark green fluid had seeped from the man's mouth and pores, staining the earth before it vanished. Within seconds, the chunin's body had gone numb, his life extinguished, and his flesh began a rapid, grotesque decay. Nathan forced himself to look away, though his mind raced with a single theory. The poisonous mist was no simple jutsu, but the work of ghosts. They must have bound their spirits to countless microscopic entities, bacteria or spores, that carried the toxic energy. When these particles scattered, they blended into the earth, ready to re-emerge at the ghost's command. Straightening, Nathan wiped his blade clean on the grass. He'd seen enough to know he was dealing with something far more sinister than a rogue shinobi. The real danger had only just begun. Nathan studied the strange phenomenon before him. What looked like a ghost corpse was, in fact, nothing more than an empty shell. A crude petri dish, if you will, designed to house a malicious entity's true form, a corrosive, sentient mist. Once a spirit dissolves into this poisonous fog, it can survive indefinitely, even reproduce within its container. That explains the talk of immortality, Nathan mused. As long as even a wisp of that fog remains intact, the spirit could, in theory, reconstitute its shell and come back to life. But he also knew the odds stacked sharply against such a resurrection. If only a few droplets of the fog survived an onslaught, the spirit would have been splintered into countless fragments, most of which would be gone forever. Reassembling from such minimal remnants would be next to impossible. Even if the spirit somehow managed to piece itself back together, the outcome would be unpredictable. Too many times in arcane research had Nathan seen resurrected personalities emerge twisted or unrecognizable. Innate character flaws might be magnified, memories could fracture, emotions might run wild or shut down entirely. With each revival, the being risked losing the very faculties that made it itself. Worse still, he realized, repeated cycles of death and rebirth could strip the spirit of all coherent thought, all semblance of humanity. Instead of a sentient ghost, what remained might be nothing more than a roiling pool of living bacteria, consciousness reduced to a mindless, virulent stain. Nathan felt a chill. This was more than undead lore. It was a dire warning about the perils of tampering with life and death. Nathan let out a quiet sigh. This really was a twisted world, overflowing with lunatics on one side and geniuses on the other. He still had no idea how that ghost had pulled off his maneuvers, but there was no denying it. The man was a true prodigy. Nathan couldn't help but hope they would meet again someday. He pushed himself to his feet and glanced around at the handful of soldiers who had survived the onslaught. After a brief pause, he gave his orders. Search the battlefield. Make sure no one slipped through the cracks. Understood, Captain, they replied in unison, fanning out in different directions. Once they'd gone, Nathan turned his attention to the proficiency panel at his side. He tapped the activation glyph, and in an instant the familiar pale blue interface sprung to life before him. Nathan tapped the interface, and the status window flickered to life. Name, Nathan Uchiha, age 12. Physique, 13, up from 12. Spirit, 15. Current chakra reserves, 22,500. Maximum chakra capacity, 56,000, previously 44,000. Bloodline, Sharingan, 3 Magatama, 9,999, 10,000. Skills and mastery levels. Chakra Refinement Technique, level 5, 338, 5,000. Wind Style, Wind Blade, level 4, 6th and 5th and 5th, 2,000. Shadow Clone Technique, level 3, 335, 1,000. Chakra Absorption Technique, level 5, 960,000. Rasengan, 4, 1,700, 2,000. Palm Immortal Technique, level 6, 6, 7, and 25, 10,000. Chakra Scalpel, level 4, 772, 2,000. Heart Reflection Technique, level 7, 885, 20,000. Sword Technique, level 6, 2,285 versus 10,000. Phantom Sword Technique, 242, 255, Instant Sword Technique, level 1, 106, 200. Chakra Control L, 4, 1,965, 2,000. Nathan closed the window and flexed his fingers. True to the system's readout, his physique stat had ticked up from 12 to 13, an incremental gain, but enough to boost his latent potential. More importantly, the theoretical ceiling on his chakra reserves had jumped from 44,000 points to a staggering 56,000. A satisfied grin crossed his face. With his body's transformation now complete, every training session from here on out would be that much more powerful. Nathan was ready for the next challenge. Thanks to his enhanced physique, Nathan's tolerance for strain had increased significantly. That extra resilience allowed him to extend his daily session of the chakra refining technique by a full hour. On its own, the added hour only yielded around 2,000 extra chakra per day, but the real gain came from his body's newfound ability to regenerate chakra more quickly. Combining both effects, Nathan calculated that his total daily chakra recovery would jump from roughly 33,000 to about 42,000. This surge in chakra didn't just bolster his jutsu, it also improved his core attributes. His physique score climbed from 12 to 13, drawing him closer to the 15-point spiritual threshold required to open the Mangekyo Sharingan without catastrophic backlash. Standing before a mirror, Nathan caught sight of the 3 Tomoe patterns swirling in his iris. Its power indicator hovered at 9,999 out of 10,000. He could feel the temptation to push forward, to force his Sharingan to evolve right then and there. But experience told him that rushing such a monumental awakening risked everything he'd worked for. With a slow, steadying breath, Nathan suppressed the urge and vowed to wait until his body and chakra reserves were more than ready. Nathan had already come this far. There was no turning back now. He decided to wait just a little longer, allowing his physique attribute to climb to 14 before attempting to awaken the Manjikyo Sharingan. By then, even if the psychic backlash threatened to crush his body, it wouldn't be fatal. "All right," he whispered to himself. "Let's do this." In that instant, Nathan's resolve crystallized. Chapter 219, Outbreak. Once he'd made up his mind, Nathan turned his full attention to the Palm Immortal technique. Judging by its current rate of physical enhancement, it would take him at least 2 months to boost his physique attribute from 13 to 14 points. Undoubtedly, 2 months was far too long, and he refused to wait that long. He saw only 2 possible shortcuts: either pour more chakra into the technique or raise the Palm Immortal technique's intrinsic level. Boosting chakra output wasn't promising. The Palm Immortal technique strengthened the body at fixed 3-minute intervals. Even if Nathan cut his sleep to just 4 hours a night, leaving 20 hours for practice, he could manage only about 400 sessions per day. Based on his past progress, that would still require a full month of uninterrupted effort. Factor in necessary rest and other commitments, and he'd be looking at 6 weeks before seeing the next physique point. No matter how much chakra he had on hand, it simply wasn't enough to accelerate the process dramatically. There was only one viable path left. He had to refine and upgrade the Palm Immortal technique itself. Nathan leaned back, reviewing his progress. All his projections so far were based on the level 6 Palm Immortal art. Once he reached level 7, everything would change. From watching how the technique improved between levels 5 and 6, he knew the next upgrade would massively amplify its power and slash the time his body needed to absorb the transformation energy. After hours of focused practice over the past few days, Nathan's mastery of the Palm Immortal art had climbed to 60,725 out of 10,000. That meant only one thing. Level 7 was within reach. A quick calculation showed he needed about 490,000 chakras to push his proficiency over the threshold. Under normal conditions, he recovered 42,000 chakras each day, so 11 days of uninterrupted training would do it. But Nathan wasn't content to wait that long. If he could find a way to earn an extra 17,000 chakras daily through side tasks or short spirit energy runs, he could shave the wait down to 9 days. And with even more supplemental chakras, he could accelerate his breakthrough further. Sacrificing less than 10 days now, in exchange for a dramatically enhanced technique later, was an investment he couldn't pass up. Nathan realized that he could use this entire period to work on the Palm Immortal technique while tending his wounds. No time lost and 2 goals achieved at once. The only question was whether Hidden Rock Village would grant him the respite he needed. Omura Yuito had assured him that a week would be enough for the village to prepare its defenses, which also meant the enemy could launch a full-scale assault at any moment. Once the battle began, chaos would reign everywhere, and there would be no quiet corner in which to cultivate his body. That's why Nathan resolved to make the Palm Immortal technique his top priority. Unlike other methods, it required no special environment, just his focus. Even amid the turmoil of wounded soldiers and scattered supplies, he could drill its forms and refine his inner energy. In fact, as villagers and fighters flocked to him for healing, he planned to use those pauses, bandaging cuts, mending bruises, as opportunities to practice the technique's precise hand movements, accelerating his mastery without drawing undue attention. After all, once war ignited, nobody would notice a healer quietly honing his skills in the midst of battle. Chapter 10. Nathan hovered over the unconscious rock ninja, chakra rippling around his outstretched palm. He knew that if he was meticulous, he could siphon every last drop of the creature's energy, and by synchronizing both phases of his cultivation, he might shock the Palm Immortal technique into an early breakthrough. He was still planning the extraction procedure when his squad trudged back to the camp. Nathan snapped the control panel shut, rose to his feet, and faced them. "Report," he ordered. Squad leader Chen wiped sweat from his brow. "We swept the entire perimeter, Captain. No survivors, no sign anyone slipped through." Nathan's gaze sharpened. "And the rock ninjas we encountered?" One of the patrolmen shook his head. "All gone. They vanished without a trace." Nathan studied the silent faces before him, then nodded. Very well. Keep up the patrol. I don't want a single square inch unchecked. The men saluted crisply, cleared away the bodies of their fallen comrades, and resumed their watch under Nathan's command. 3 days slipped by in relentless routines and moonless nights. At last, Nathan returned to the western mountain base to rest, settling into meditation to restore his strength. Just as he sank into stillness, a crushing force bore down on the entire encampment, cold, oppressive, and utterly alien. His heart thundered in his chest. Every hair on his arms rose as he sensed it. Something unimaginable was approaching, and nothing could prepare him for what was to come. Nathan's eyes snapped open. He seized the short sword beside him, slipped out of the tent, and sprang onto a nearby tree. With a single thought, he activated his Sharingan. Moonlight bathed the clearing, revealing a figure wreathed in dark red chakra, radiating a fierce, almost feral energy. Instantly, Nathan recognized the transformation. A half-tailed beast's power coursing through its Jinchuriki. There were only 2 Jinchuriki in the vicinity, Han, the 5 tails, and Lao Zi, the 4 tails. Nathan recalled Han's distinctive breath signature wasn't like this. This had to be Lao Zi. Was the rock ninja preparing a full-scale assault? His question was answered in the next heartbeat. Lao Zi's lips peeled back in a snarl as he summoned spheres of chakra, mostly vivid blue with a few dark, purplish-black orbs. They swirled together in midair, fusing into a single inky black sphere of condensed energy, the fearsome-tailed beast ball. With a roar, it hurtled toward Nathan. He clenched his sword, preparing to meet the oncoming blast. It wasn't quite accurate to say the attack was aimed at Nathan's position. The real target was the fortress of Fengliu town, wedged between his squad and the rock ninja camp. As a massive tailed beast sphere hurtled toward the town, a lone figure materialized in midair to stop it dead in its tracks. His bright blonde hair framed a calm, handsome face, and his clear blue eyes burned with unshakable confidence. Who else could it be but Minato Namikaze? Nathan wasn't surprised by Minato's arrival. In fact, every Jonin on the field had known he would come. 2 days ago, their scouts reported that Konoha would dispatch its yellow flash for precisely this kind of emergency. The objective was obvious: deal with the Jinchuriki. With the rock village having unleashed 2 human pillars to strike Fengliu town, Konoha could hardly stand by. Minato's mission was not only to defend the village, but also to ensure the safety of his wife, Uzumaki Kushina, and as always, he was more than ready to do both. Logically, if the enemy sent out a Jinchuriki, Konoha's best response would be to counter with one of their own. But with Uzumaki Kushina absent, the burden fell entirely on Namikaze Minato. Nathan watched the unfolding battle, thoughts racing beneath his steady gaze. The moment Minato appeared on the field, he formed hand seals in rapid succession. Pressing his palm into empty air, he summoned a colossal sealing array in an instant. At its heart, a dark rift yawned open. A specialized teleportation formation evolved from the Flying Thunder God technique. Flying Thunder God, guiding lightning. As the enemy's tailed beast ball struck the rift, invisible forces snatched it mid-flight. With a flick of Minato's wrist, the massive sphere was flung through the space-time tier toward a distant plane. Kaboom! A thunderous explosion ripped across the landscape, followed by a blinding white flash. Every shinobi, whether from Konoha or Iwagakure, stood frozen, jaws agape at the sheer power of Minato's counterattack. Not only was the sheer force of the tailed beast ball astonishing, but Minato Akaze's effortless summoning of it out of thin air was even more bewildering. In that moment, every shinobi on the field realized the yellow flash had truly arrived. Allied troops broke into cheers, while the enemy faltered in fear. After all, reputation casts its own shadow. No matter how many stories you've heard of Minato's exploits, nothing compares to witnessing his power in action. Today, there could be no doubt of his legend. Chapter 220, Melee. A few breaths later, a thunderous shockwave rippled across the field, rolling in from the distance. Ninja from both the Leaf Village and the Stone Village shielded their faces with raised arms, bracing against the blast. Even Nathan, standing atop a western ridge, felt the force vibrate beneath his feet and squinted against the aftershock. The raw power of the jade-tailed beast was astonishing. From the way Lao Zi behaved, it was obvious that the Stone Village planned to exploit the knight's cover. hit the Leaf forces while they slept, and level Fengliu town in one devastating strike. But the Leaf Shinobi had anticipated the ambush. Their vigilance was too high, and the attack had failed. Worse still for Lao Zi, he did not have the chakra reserves to launch a second cataclysm so soon. Meanwhile, Han, the Five-Tails Jinchuriki, watched with a clenched jaw. Under his current control, he couldn't replicate such destructive power. Only by abandoning all restraint and fully yielding to the Five-Tails, transforming completely, could he match that magnitude of attack. Yet if he did, the beast would no longer recognize friend from foe. Once unleashed, the Five-Tails would rampage without discrimination, striking down allies and enemies alike. Because the Iwagakure leadership refused to let Lao Zi and Han fully transform into tailed beasts, or even remain in their half-tailed beast forms for long, they lived in constant fear that the beasts might seize control and wreak havoc. Jinchuriki are undeniably powerful weapons, but until they unleash their full power, they can't dominate a battlefield. At best, they're the equivalent of a handful of extra jonin. That's exactly why Konoha felt confident enough to confront Iwagakure here. Otherwise, the enemy would have slipped away long ago or called in even stronger reinforcements. "Kill them!" The shout came from the Iwagakure archer whose sneak attack had just failed. Without hesitation, he loosed his command, and the Iwagakure ninjas surged forward like an anthill turned inside out. They split into 3 sweeping columns, fanning out toward the ramparts of the Fengliu town fortress. On the Konoha side, shinobi poured from the buildings in tight squads. Each group formed defensive wedges, bracing themselves as the Iwagakure forces bore down. In a heartbeat, blades met blades, chakra flared, and the battle for the fortress erupted in a storm of steel and jutsu. Under the pale moonlight, the battlefield descended into chaos. Rock ninjas and Konoha shinobi clashed in ruthless combat, their shouts and the clash of steel echoing across the plain. On a rocky outcrop to the west, Nathan had intended simply to observe until a scout's urgent voice cut through the racket. "Captain, enemies are coming." "From where?" Nathan demanded. "Southeast," came the reply. Nathan swept his gaze downhill. At the base of the mountain, more than 200 rock ninjas were advancing at a steady trot. If they pressed on, they'd reach the summit in under 15 minutes. Their objective was clear: secure this ridge. Holding this high ground wasn't just a matter of tactical advantage. In the world of shinobi, the greatest killers aren't only the tailed beasts, nor, for that matter, the Cloud Village's legendary chakra cannon capable of striking the moon, a device only a handful of villages have ever attempted. Equally feared was another colossal weapon common to all 5 great shinobi villages, the so-called offensive technique. Once unleashed from an elevated position, its destructive power could decide the outcome of an entire war. Nathan tightened his grip on his weapon. If the rock ninjas wanted this hill, they'd have to go through him first. Nathan perched atop the forest canopy, eyes narrowed as he watched the distant silhouettes of Hidden Rock Village shinobi advance toward Fengliu town. Rumor had it they'd perfected a devastating attack technique, a massive sealing jutsu that stored dozens of powerful ninjutsu in a scroll. Once unleashed, its combined force could obliterate an entire settlement, much like Kakashi's Chidori once evolved into the Raikiri. If the rock ninjas seized this high ground, they'd rain destruction down from above without mercy. But no matter what tactics the Hidden Rock masterminds had in mind, Nathan vowed they would not take this position. He tapped his communicator. "All units, prepare for combat. Hold the line at every choke point." "Understood, Captain," came the crisp reply from the Konoha Chunin stationed below. From the rear encampment, squads of shinobi dispersed along forest paths and tree bridges, racing to their defensive strongholds. In moments, the verdant ridges bristled with leaf-green armor, kunai at the ready, faces set in grim determination. High among the branches, Nathan summoned his chakra interface. The holographic display flickered to life. Chakra, 28,506 of 36,500. He inhaled steadily, closing his eyes as he focused inward. Drawing on every reserve, he began to mold his chakra for the Palm Immortal technique, the only countermeasure he trusted against the rock ninja's impending onslaught. As the wind rustled through the leaves, Nathan steadied his hands on his lap, ready to unleash a power that might turn the tide and save Fengliu town from ruin. After roughly 15 minutes, during which he paused every 10 seconds to adjust, Nathan's chakra level finally dipped to about 20,000 points, so he stopped. He wasn't halting because he'd run out of things to do with his energy. He needed the empty capacity to absorb the fresh chakra flowing in from the rock ninjas camped at the foot of the mountain. To Nathan, they'd effectively become walking power sources. He made sure never to let his chakra drop much below 20,000. That amount was more than enough to handle most threats, and even if it weren't, an extra few thousand points wouldn't make a significant difference. So for the time being, he resolved to maintain his reserves at around 20,000, spending any excess as opportunities arose. With this approach, his Palm Immortal technique should soon reach level 7, delivering a substantial boost to his physical strength. Nathan's daydream of the future shattered in an instant. A thunderous explosion ripped through the forest canopy, immediately followed by the metallic clash of kunai and the shouts of unseen combatants. Nathan snapped out of his reverie, peered toward the noise, and saw the battle had already erupted below. Without hesitation, he dropped from the treetop, landing lightly among the branches before sprinting toward the fray. No sooner had he reached the edge of the clearing than a volley of kunai whistled straight for him. Nathan's eyes tracked each blade's trajectory, mapping them in his mind. With a blur of movement, he wove through their paths, his feet barely touching the ground. As he pressed forward, more shuriken and kunai flew at him from all sides. When evasion alone wouldn't suffice, he gripped his dagger and met the weapons head-on. Ringing dings echoed as he deflected projectile after projectile, sending them spinning harmlessly aside. He charged past the Iwakura forward team, weaving through their ranks and closing in on the rear guard. There, the tide of battle grew even thicker. Iwa ninja vastly outnumbered their Konohagakure counterparts, and Nathan suddenly found himself at the heart of the enemy formation. Within seconds, he was surrounded on all sides, ninjas closing in, blades raised, and battle cries filling the air. But Nathan's resolve didn't waver. With dagger poised and senses honed, he prepared to break through the ring of foes and turn this ambush to his advantage. Nathan didn't flinch. This was exactly what he'd been waiting for. In this battlefield, he could act without restraint. As a squad of Iwagakure Jinin charged him, Nathan's hands flashed through the seals in an instant. He spun on his heel, opened his mouth, and unleashed a roaring sphere of flame. Fire release, Phoenix Immortal Fire Technique. Fall back! Watch out! Someone shouted, but it was too late. The fireball tore through their form, Asian, scattering soldiers like rag dolls. A few were knocked off their feet. Others tumbled, screaming, their bodies scorched and smoking as they hit the ground. A sharp thrill ran through Nathan's veins. He sprang forward among the downed Jinin, chakra crackling at his fingertips. With a practiced motion, he activated his chakra absorption technique, plunging his hands into the unsuspecting shinobi. He drew out their chakra, first one, then another, using their life energy as both shield and weapon against any who still dared to attack. By the time the Iwagakure ninja realized what was happening, it was already too late. Nathan stood at the center of the clearing, eyes gleaming with power, the stolen chakra swirling around him like a dark aura. The battle, for now, belonged entirely to him.